Travelers of Reddit, where do you never want to go again? Saudi Arabia. My parents worked there when I was younger, and as a minor I came along. We lived in a gated type of community with very high walls to shield the Arabs from illiberal lifestyles. Checkpoints everywhere to ensure that all women were accompanied by male relative. Everything closed down several times a day for prayers. Constantly hearing that high-pitched yelling on speakers everywhere made me sick. We lived nearby some kind of arena for public executions and other punishments. Seemed to be the highlight of their week. Nothing but sand. Ultra rude men and women dressed like ghosts. Extremely hot. A neighbor's wife was whipped and tortured for driving a car around the block. Saudi as hell. Edit. This blew up a little. To clear up a few things. This was late 80s, 89 to 90 probably. I did not personally see any executions. Went to an American school. Most of it was great as a kid. I met a lot of friends for life, and although weird it had some great moments. I do have many good memories from our sheltered world. It was only later, and after the woman driving incident it became scary. That's when everything else fell into place with the checkpoints, and why my mom had to dress up in a weird costume to cover her face. And there is a comma in there somewhere. The weather was hot. Hard to say if the women were. On a cruise. It's kind of dark, apologies for that. So and I got in some sort of a fight one night, something so stupid I don't even remember. So I went to the casino, and that's all I remember, leaving for the casino. Next thing I knew I was waking up in a bed in a room I'd never been in before, and these two dudes were standing there laughing over me. I ran out of the room and found mine. I tried contacting the medical team to get a kit done. They said not to waste their time. I tried notifying the crews of what happened. They also said not to waste their time. So I was terrified and trapped on this cruise with my possible rapists, and the crews didn't give any sort of facts. Never again. To answer some questions, it was Carnival, about 8 or 9 years ago. I didn't follow up after the cruise as the window was past for figuring out what actually happened. Or at least that's how I felt at the time. I'm doing really well these days. Thanks for the kind wishes. The few angry people, I'm sorry to upset you. You're right too. I could have been smarter. I no longer go out alone, no matter where I am. Don't forget to bring a towel. Aka a friend. Congress Heights TC. I was in a group of about 15 to 20 well-to-do white kids visiting Washington DC with our church when I was 18. Despite coming from a wealthy parish, our leaders sought to save money and had us stay in a church in Congress Heights, one of the worst areas in DC. We walked from the metro to the church, where we were staying around noon on our first day, walked back to the metro to explore the city the same day around 3 p.m. Nothing went wrong during the day, but I had been to DC 4 times prior. I knew this was an incredibly rough area. Later that night, we walked back from the metro to the church around 8:30, when it was already dark. Bad idea. We got jumped by about 9 to 12 thugs who managed to split our group into two, sending some hiding in alleyways, others fighting the thugs, and some running for their lives for about 4 blocks. Knives, butts, and belts were all used on us, and the only way we escaped our attackers was by darting into a fire station. Needless to say, it was a rough night having a knife put in my face, running for 4 blocks, having my friends being rushed to the hospital, hopping a fence, nearly getting slammed by incoming traffic, then being questioned by police until 1 a.m. the next morning. Few weeks later, police contacted our group and told us it was likely a coordinated attack based off of security camera footage. They believe they watched us during our 2 walks to and from the metro during the day and knew to expect us to come wandering back at night. Edit. I'd like to add that in the days after, the parishioners were extremely charitable, going out of their way to get food catered for us and rented a bunch of movies for us to watch for the remaining 3 days we stayed. An interesting side note, our chaperones tried to paint a soft picture of the neighborhood in the days following. Opposite of that, the priest, parishioners, and a lady who worked in the church's food bank talked with us about how it's undeniably rough and to not get comfortable. Each Congress Heights resident who we talked to either had been mugged themselves or knew individuals who were mugged and were fed up with the inaction by community officials. Edit again. So how did my trip end? We got a call from back home saying we had to cut our trip by a day. The day after the mugging, we stayed in. The day after, we went and saw tourist attractions, this time using rental cars to take us to metro stations. The third day was our final day, and we took Ubers to the airport and flew home. However, despite the shit we had to go through, I met someone on that trip who became important in my life and has stuck with me through thick and thin ever since. Istanbul. I crossed a few big items off my bucket list. I got to see the Black Sea and the Bosphorus. I toured the Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque, but overall I really hated my time in Istanbul. I felt like I was being assaulted every time I went outside. You just could not escape the street hawkers and people constantly trying to hustle you and sell you stuff. Even if you got away from the tourist centers, you would still have restaurant owners coming out and following you. On 2 separate occasions, while my wife and I were just trying to go for an evening walk, we had waiters physically hold up oversized menus and block the entire sidewalk and try to force us into their restaurant. When we took one of the ferry rides to the Black Sea, we figured we had a few moments of calm, but salesmen jumped on the boat and just kept trying to sell you stuff out of a briefcase and wouldn't leave you alone. If you said no, they just shifted tactics and kept trying to sell you stuff, which made sightseeing and just enjoying the view impossible. Once we arrived, the assault just continued. We had lunch and couldn't walk because all the shop owners were hounding us and following us, to the point where we just went back to our original restaurant, ordered another appetizer, and spent the rest of our afternoon not going out because we were sick of dealing with people. If I could describe what Istanbul was like, it would be boorish, aggressive, and rude. And Ataturk Airport is one of the worst I've visited. It's crowded, hot, and there is no place to sit. I will go out of my way to never visit Turkey again. The train from Lhasa, Tibet to Beijing, China, 50 hours 57 minutes and 19 seconds. The 5-foot hard sleeper designed for aviation left my 6 feet 1 inch frame hanging with only 18 inches of room between my chest and the top of the train. The train would not allow open windows as people chain smoked and hacked up phlegm, which, one of the most ancient Chinese secrets, told them to spit on the floors. I watched people dual fisting cigarettes in my cabin, eating ramen, comparing ringtones for hours. I had E. coli from eating a duck tongue on a bed of radishes. Later, I saw them washing the radishes in gutter water next to the road. I incorrectly suspected the duck tongues, which are served cold and have a bone in them, for those interested. My only relief was staggering to the food car, with little communication ability, ordering soup and a beer. The seaweed soup served cold and the beer hot. Tibet is one of the most life-changing places I've ever visited. Experiencing a night at 19,076 feet at Mount Everest Advanced Base Camp made it worth all the forthcoming suffering. But as I laid there for 2 days in that coffin, lined with repurposed prison mattresses, I lost sight of the end, forgot about ever how boarded, and thought I must have done something pretty terrible in my life to be eternally damned to this train fueled by pain, anguish, suffering, but primarily cigarette smoke. Would I do it again? Absolutely not. Would I recommend it? I would offer my verbatim experience. Would I stop you? Not a chance in hell. That is one of many experiences I've had visiting 18 countries in 2 years, including Jordan, Honduras, and Norway, 225 miles north of the Arctic Circle for New Year's. I know this post is for people to describe the worst. I would be let down if I was not topped by someone going to prison or a hospital. I assure you that with it comes the best. Never let horror stories deter you. Travel. As much as I loved living in Japan, would never come back alone. The amount of times I was followed, stalked, offered jobs, propositioned for sex by men really turned me off to solo traveling, and as a result I never saw as much of the country as I wanted to. The amount of times I had to walk to a police box to get someone to leave me alone was ridiculous. At one point I was stopped 3 times on the main street near Yokohama station by 3 different men. It probably didn't help that I was short, Asian and weak looking. It also wasn't just me. My friend was once followed around supermarkets by this old man, who offered her 10,000 yen to go home with him. What really fucks with me is that it's so common that it's not really a big deal when it comes up on conversation. When hanging out with my Japanese friends it happened to come up in conversation. Most of the girls were like, oh yeah, that's happened to me before, but the guys were like, oh really? I never thought it was such a problem. And then we quickly started talking about something else. That being said, Japan is incredible and a lot of fun with friends. I would go back in a heartbeat if I could see them again. Edit. I would just like to say that my experience doesn't mean that every small Asian woman will experience this in Japan. Additionally, I lived in the country as a student and was not just here on a holiday. Women get harassed in every country and every culture. I have experienced harassment in most countries I've traveled to as well as in my own country. I will stand by my opinion that Japan was the country that I experienced this the most. After quickly browsing the comments and noticing a strong trend, I have to say, this is the reason why travel agencies still exist. My mom recently passed away, but she took 8 people including myself on an amazing, affordable and unforgettable trip to Italy. We stayed in an incredible private villa in Tuscany, toured the small mountain villages and churches, stayed a night in Florence at a wonderful Airbnb that cost the equivalent of $100, and beat the crowds to Il Duomo. We climbed to the top of Giotto's tower and saw the entire city laid out below us. We also hit up Rome and again went on a guided tour of the Vatican Museum. I was rolling my eyes a little because our guide was kinda beachy and hustling us along, no stop, no pictures, hurry hurry hurry, but then we hit a massive set of doors and she turned around with a huge smile and said, I've never been the first, I've done this 10 years and never been the first. We were literally the first people to walk into the Sistine Chapel that day, and I generally have no appreciation for art, but I'm tearing up thinking about how I felt walking in there. Followed that up with the best pizza in the world, literally at Bonce's Pizzerium. We had an amazing tour of the Roman Colosseum including the underworks, the actual stage and the uppermost level with in-depth history for like 3 hours. We accomplished all this in 10 days and still had plenty of goof off days for couples to split off and do their own thing or just sit on the lawn of the villa and paint or read. No rushing, itinerary to meet and no stress. We never would have managed half of it without mom's experience with traveling, and especially her personal advice about Italy. List goes on, and I'll probably turn this into a sort of tribute to mom on Facebook, but my point is, if you really aren't super crazy organized and are traveling somewhere new and once in a lifetime, spend a few extra dollars to have a professional make arrangements. TLDR. Sometimes it's worth it to go to a real person for travel advice and planning. Khajuraho, India. It's most famous for its intricately sculpted temples, some of which depict sexual acts. I traveled through India alone for months, and, as an obviously foreign woman, I got the expected unwanted attention. But Khajuraho was different. It was non-stop harassment everywhere I went, and the men always became aggressive when I ignored/politely declined their advances. I was having such a horrible time that I decided to just go back to the hotel where a man in the lobby wanted to have dinner with me and I, again, declined. The lady at the desk must have given him my room number because he called my phone until I disconnected it and then started pounding on my door and telling me to let him in. It was truly horrible. Edit. I've gotten many responses to this comment, so I wanted to clarify that I had a wonderful time traveling solo in India. I met tons of lovely people and built some friendships that still last 4 years later. I'm from a culture where machismo is prevalent and know how to stand my ground/ignore/yell back. I learned some Hindi and did this a few times when I deemed it necessary. I don't sweat the small stuff. I also dressed conservatively, usually a salwar kameez with long sleeves, and traveled with people I met in guest houses if I was going too far off the beaten path. This one day in Khajuraho was just a higher level of intensity that I'd experienced before. I wouldn't however let this prevent me from traveling to India again, since I had a very positive experience overall. Belize City. Belize was one of our stops for the cruise we were on. I always heard about how gorgeous Belize was, and I'm sure there are beautiful parts of Belize, but Belize City was an absolute shithole. They pretty much dropped a majority of white US citizens and thought it would be okay to let us roam a city that was torn by local civil war. The city was full of armed military guards standing at street corners and the city canals and streets were incredibly polluted. I live in Baltimore and have seen some bad neighborhoods, but Belize City seemed way worse than anything I've seen. Many stores had armed guards who would unlock the door to let you in, and once you were inside, they would lock the door behind you. We didn't experience any issues with the or violence, but it was the strangest feeling getting stared down from every angle. We stayed for about an hour and then decided it was time to get the fuck out. As we were leaving, there were 3 people standing near the port. They looked at us and said, "Welcome to the real world." Once we got back to the ship, we strolled past the lobby. There may have been 4 or 5 employees working the customer service desk. Each employee had a deep line and the chatter was all centered around angry complaints about dropping us off at Belize City. Needless to say, that same cruise line took Belize off their itinerary soon after. India. I'm a very experienced traveler and have lived in undeveloped countries before, so I thought I was prepared. I was a fool. Crowds. 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 Even in the mountains. Even in the forest. Even in remote back alleys. The cause of many of these other problems. Far worse on the roads, if you can call them that. Rivers of chaos is probably more accurate. Massive lines of rickshaws, ducks, vehicles, animals, and pedestrians. An unending death knell of honking, screaming, shoving, and crashing. All in a cloud of filthy dust and smog that gets into your hair, your eyes, and your throat. I coughed for 3 weeks after I left the country. There is nowhere out of the way. There is nowhere to take a breather for a moment. It takes a lot of the pleasure out of the awesome street food. One of the best things about the country. I personally witnessed 6 accidents in my 1 month in India. Going virtually anywhere results in plunging into traffic. Of course, this might not be so bad if not for the rudeness. Beyond rudeness, China and Korea have absolutely nothing on the pure nastiness. That means going outside of a private residence in India. Shoving, being screamed at, cars driving directly at you because they want to use the place you're walking for a parking spot, then blaring their horn in your face. Being grabbed, being cheated. Very tied into what is probably the world's worst tout culture. You know, when you go to a temple in Thailand and you get 5 to 8 people bugging you with scam tours, unwarranted advice they then ask you to pay for, useless goods, etc. Well, multiply them by 5 and ramp up the aggression by a factor of 10. There are dozens of them, and they are everywhere. On random streets, highways, outside banks, on buses whenever they stop. They run up to you, shoving, grabbing, pressing their goods into your hands to demand you pay, harassing you so you'll pay them to leave you alone, screaming in your face, following you, going to find their friends to harass you if you buy anything from them because you're an easy mark. Worse, almost every service provider not inside a professional business, which make up less than 10% of the workforce in India, feel entitled to try to rip foreigners off. The worst is, they act so initially friendly, then flip the switch as soon as they smell money. It's creepy, and it's everywhere. That friendly security guard asking you where you're from and asking for a selfie. He's going to ask for money. Wandering through a village and some smiling farmers ask where you're going and give you directions. Their smiles fall away like clockwork and they begin demanding money as soon as you thank them, becoming angry and shouting if you don't pay up. Particularly because of the massively overdeveloped tourism industry that has obliterated the cultures and landscapes that they are ostensibly celebrating. Rampant animal abuse, but never of cows. Environmental devastation. Garbage everywhere. Massive tourist lines. Horrific traffic bringing the rudeness and congestion even into remote mountains and forests. Experiencing anything involves getting harassed, often groped by security, even to get on a subway, and then seeing that it's actually falling apart and has already been manicured for photo ops. To its credit, certain spots are very heavily policed by security to keep this from happening, but it's already happened to a massive extent. The islands of Thailand are in danger of being destroyed by tourism, but it's already happened in India. Of course, remote temples and ashrams, where you can stay, are an exception. Islands of peace and serenity away from the crowds and the crime. Besides the aforementioned touts and aggressive bargaining culture, there are pickpockets everywhere in the crowds, but that actually might be better than being alone in them at night, where you'll be seen even more as a mark. Of course, even if it were safe you wouldn't want to walk in the dark because you'd step into garbage. So much garbage. In the forest, in the national parks, on the streets, on the roads, in the rivers, in fields. Much of it is burned, but even more is dumped. This is understandable because of the lack of infrastructure. Even in nice hotels, even in the major cities, power outages, loss of hot water, and the internet going out are common. There's more, but I think I've said enough. I should also offer a disclaimer here that I have tremendous respect for Indian history and culture, and I love my Indian friends. People who see you as a person and not a mark there are extremely warm and friendly. I recognize these problems are caused by its pioneering transition to democracy and the difficulty of managing such a massive, divided population. However, as a traveler, India was far and away the worst country I've ever visited. If you're interested in cultures similar to India's without as many of these issues, I recommend Nepal and Sri Lanka. They're beautiful, more preserved, and much more pleasant. Marrakech. This is a good, but one, so get comfortable. I'd been twice with male friends, but the third one went with a mixed crowd. We stayed together as a group through all of the holiday until the final day, when the girls went out shopping in the markets on their own. We found them an hour later crying and shaking. One of the market sellers had been really aggressive with them, pulling them into his shop and physically holding them there until they bought something. Then him pinned one girl against the wall trying to kiss her. He insisted it was part of his Berber tradition to kiss her, but eventually just settled to kiss her on the cheek while she repulsed. It gets worse. We reported this to the tourist police and they went absolutely mad. They made us wait in the station while they found the market seller and dragged him out in front of us. The guy was crying buckets and collapsed on the floor in front of us. He begged us to forgive him, but the police were behind us, grabbed our arms, and said, "This is a very bad man. We need you to tell us you want to prosecute him. Don't waste our time." We were really intimidated by this, particularly as we don't speak French or Arabic and the police were gripping onto us. We were genuinely scared they would hold our passports and stop us going home. So then the police tell us this man is going to go to prison for 7 years for the crime, but we need to give a written statement. So we tell the full story to a man in an office, and we writes it out in Arabic. We can't read this, but he tells us his translation. It's completely wrong. According to the report, it was a serious sexual assault and he pinned the girl down on the floor. We go back and forth trying to fix the statement for hours, but settling on the best we can do. He keeps saying the details aren't important. Their details were things like he forced me on the floor and put his hands all over my body, which did not happen. They also take our passport details. More. But we now need to go to the main police station to report the crime. So they bundle us into a taxi. 6 people on the back seat. And we go to the main police station. It's an absolute shithole. It looks like a massive derelict factory that was converted into a crack house. We get lead to a room where the market seller is stood in a linoop with other men. He's still crying his eyes out and can barely stand, so the linoop is pretty pointless. There isn't any glass separating us. He's literally stood in front of us in the same room, which is really distressing for the girl that reported this. He's begging us to make this stop, but we are too scared to say something to the police. We have no idea where we are. The building is huge, trashed, empty, like 5 policemen. The toilets were flooded, and we don't know where we are. Way out from the city center and it's getting late. We eventually tell the police we fly home tomorrow, and they get really annoyed. They say we need to be at the courts tomorrow to stand in front of this man and accuse him of a crime in front of a public audience. But we can't, cause we'll be on a flight at that time. It now looks like things will work out. They say the man cannot be prosecuted without the victim coming forward, which is a relief to us as we no longer want this. Remember, we are stuck in a strict foreign country, not speaking the language, and being pushed around by the police, whom are notoriously heavy-handed. They seem fed up at the point and drive us back to our hostel in a riot van. We fly home and think it's all over. A month later the doorbell rings. There's a Moroccan man stood there. He tells us Hassan is still in prison, and he needs our help. The man has traveled miles across the country. He's here on a work visa to ask us for help. Apparently the market seller's lawyer gave the family our home address from the passport details so they could begin us to go back to Marrakech and tell the courts Hassan is innocent. We don't know if this is a scam or if he man is armed or anything, so we tell him to write us a letter and we'll respond to only that. A month passes and nothing happens. Then the doorbell rings again, and this time there's a French woman stood there. She tells us she's flown over from southern France as a friend of the family to beg us for help. Apparently she used to live in our city and so is staying with friends nearby. We arranged to meet in a cafe the next day. Turns out this is all true. Really a very elaborate con. She shows us newspaper articles, the police report, and websites. We see a clipping from a whole page of the Marrakech Times which describes the event as a assault sexual. The lady tells us that other market sellers paid the police to put Hassan away because he was taking their business. We don't know if this is true. We refuse to go back to Marrakech and go in front of the courts because we still don't know for certain if this is a con or what might happen to us. We write a statement and get it signed by a local policeman as a witness. In our statement we say he did grab at the girl, but that nothing else happened and that the man is innocent. The French woman says that she knows Hassan and he would never grab at a woman, but obvious that isn't true. So the French woman leaves with our note and says she'll stay in contact to let us know he gets out okay. She never wrote back to us and we still don't know what happened and how much was true. We certainly won't be going back to Marrakech and are left with bad memories. Beijing. Worst faking city I've ever been to. 1. Can't breathe the air. 2. Can't drink the water. 3. Full of knuckle-headed country bumpkins looking for work, which means they are rude as all get out, utterly uneducated, and way more hostile than your worst stereotype of an American. 4. Everyone on the road, especially the cab drivers, will try to kill you. That last bit is no joke. I actually got into a fist fight with a cabbie for almost running me over while I was holding my infant son, while I was crossing in the zebra stripes, while I was crossing on a green. He just ran the light and came so close to me, I had to step back. I kicked his car as he sped past, that's how close he was. And he slammed on his brakes and came out to yell. I yelled back. He punched me in the face. I'm still holding my infant son, by the way, and I faking throttled him one-handed. I kept trying to give my son to my wife while pummeling him, but she wouldn't have it, because she knew if I had 2 free hands, I'd have ripped his faking head off. When I finally got my senses I realized I was going to be arrested in a communist dictatorship if I didn't stop. So I grabbed my wife, still holding on to my kid, and beat a hasty exit into the metro station. That town has the most miserable faking people on earth. Fuck Beijing. That being said, Xi'an, Shanghai, Hong Kong and Macau were lovely. Something about Beijing brings out the worst in the Chinese. Chungking Mansions in Hong Kong Lower District, Kowloon. I had no problems with Hong Kong itself. It's a great city. But we made the mistake of getting a 3-person hotel room in Chungking Mansions, 2 beds crammed into a tiny room barely big enough to fit the 3 of us standing at once. The toilet and shower were the same room. The one window opened very slightly and showed the center open air shaft of the building. A slimy grimy wall of filth with no visible effort of maintenance. Getting to our room was another nightmare in itself. The way to the elevator takes you past this bizarre bazaar full of people trying to sell things that may or may not have been stolen. I don't know for a fact or not, it just felt extremely uncomfortable and sketchy having these hawkers, I think that's what they were called, follow you around this labyrinth of shops just to find 2 elevators big enough for maybe 4 people squeezed tight, then waiting in line for 10 minutes just to get on the elevator. It was a cultural experience for sure, but I'm fine to never experience that specific building again. Going out was almost as excruciating as coming in. This really forced us to stay out as much as possible and not come back to the room unless we had to. TLDR, Chungking Mansions is a filth hole I'll never step foot in again. Paris. I was there for 3 days to get over jet lag before performing in England. Worst time ever. The architecture and sights were beautiful, but the people are the worst I've met traveling. Locals yelled at my colleagues and I for taking up space and almost running over her children when we stepped off the sidewalk to take a photo. She yelled some profanities in front of a group of children and was very disrespectful seeing as I was nowhere near her. Then when I ordered food in every restaurant, I tried to order in French as I'm from Canada and no basic conversational French. However, the accents and grammar are different than true French, so every time I spoke in their language, they acted insulted and responded in English. I always speak the language of the country I'm in, it's only respectful. Even if I'm butchering it, I always appreciate being taught the correct way. Spanish-speaking countries do this more I've found, which really helps instead of dismissing me when I'm clearly struggling. As for street vendors, I've been to really rural parts of developing countries, like Guatemala, where pickpocketing and in-your-face street sellers are expected. However, I found that people were not invasive or scamming tourists in poor places like Guatemala. Locals made their daily wage selling beautiful handmade pieces. In Paris, however, people in my travel group were pickpocketed on our first day, and on our second day, a colleague was put in a Chinese finger trap by a street scammer and was told she can't be released until she gives them money. They weren't even selling anything, just scamming vulnerable tourists. Overall, Paris was filled with rude people and smelled like cheap cigarettes. Karachi, Pakistan. I walk out of the airport and was waiting for my ride when this random guy in his 50s asked me if I'm American. There was half a dozen other Pakistanis around who perked up when they heard that, so I was super grateful to say I was Canadian. Unfortunately, the guy's English wasn't great and my Urdu is just words/phrases, so there was a bit of confusion and he asked if I was American again. This time the other guys moved a little closer to hear the conversation and my vigilance goes up a notch. I repeat slowly that I'm Canadian and try to ask where he's from in return. My driver finally shows up and translates for me, and suddenly everyone is smiles and welcoming handshakes. My sweat wasn't entirely because of the heat. First time I traveled there for business, I stayed in just a regular hotel a few blocks from one of the main police stations. Sometime between 2 AM and 3 AM I wake up to something loud that rattles the room. So I get down on the floor and sneak over to the window to peek outside when I hear several really loud popping noises from down the street. I figure out that it's gunfire. I never heard it in person before and get back down on the floor in case of stray bullets because the gunfire continues for a few minutes with individual shots and strings of automatic fire. I finally hear sirens and it stops. I found out the next day that the police station had been bombed, the evidence locker specifically, and there had been a gunfight in the street just 2 blocks from me. Welcome to Karachi. Second time I go there it's because the supplier from the first time reneged on our deal and sent product that was already rotten. I make a deal with another supplier whose father is a high-ranking officer in the military and promises a good deal. Well, the container gets loaded. 30% deposit is paid by the Chinese buyers to my Pakistani supplier and the container gets put on the ship. I send a copy of the bill of lading to the Chinese and wait for the 70% balance. If anyone has done business with the Chinese, then you know that if there's a way to fuck you over, they'll find it or make a new way. The ship is about to leave Karachi and my Chinese buyers decide not to pay the 70% as is norm. My Pakistani supplier becomes worried about being cheated and starts to pressure me. 2 days later, and my Chinese buyers are still feeding me bullshit about going to pay ASAP, and I'm looking like a blatant liar and fool to the Pakistani suppliers. Then I meet the colonel. I get a knock on my hotel door and see these 2 big Pakistani guys through the peephole. My supplier opens the door, they walk in, and behind them is my supplier's father, the colonel. He's a scary faking dude, barely talks and straight to the point. Bad news for me cause I got nothing to give him. Coincidentally my visa just happened to expire that day, so the colonel graciously offers to take my passport and renew my visa so I don't run into legal troubles. I'm flipping out at this point, cause that's a Canadian passport and worth its weight in platinum internationally. Even better is when the colonel informs me that I'll now be his guest in this hotel until my Chinese buyers send the 70% balance. I spent 4 days and nights in that room with someone there with me 24 hours a day. I barely slept, and when I got up I'd see hair on my pillow that had fallen out from the stress. My hair is back to cosmic perfection again. Don't worry. I started getting desperate and finally decided to fake a wire transfer for the 70% balance using Photoshop and keeping my laptop angled slightly away from the other guys the whole time. I swear I went down to the pixels and made it flawless because I figured I only had one chance at this. The ship was just a few days from reaching Hong Kong at this point, and once it reaches land, the Chinese would have absolutely tried to renegotiate the price and waited while the product sat in the Hong Kong sun and heat, losing value each hour. Or they could just bribe the security guards and empty the container in the night. Welcome to China. Anyways, I email a copy of the fake money transfer to my Pakistani supplier, but he's rightly suspicious. I do my best to convince him and throw in the truth that I just want to go home to my newlywed young ex-wife and safety. He agrees, and him and I and one of the colonel's men pack my suitcase and backpack and clear the hotel bill. My passport appears out of nowhere and we get in his car. The sun is setting and my flight leaves in less than 4 hours, so I'm getting super nervous and panicky. I'm sitting in the car thinking that I might just get away with this whole thing, and if I get back to Hong Kong I'm going to cave my Chinese buyer's face in to relieve my stress. Then we pull into a Western Union and my stomach plummets. He checks the number and it doesn't come up. Tries again and still no luck. I tell him it's because of the time difference and that it's a Saturday. The Western Union clerk agrees with me, thank the cosmos, and he reluctantly leaves. The sun is down and there are almost no street lights outside the core of Karachi, so we are driving out onto a dark desert highway with cool wind in my hair, away from the city lights. I suddenly realize that they are going to kill me in the desert and my body will never be found. I clutch my backpack with my laptop, passport, air ticket and other essentials tighter and resolve to sprint towards the airport as soon as the car stops at a traffic light, even if I have to leave my suitcase behind. Then I see it up ahead, Shangri-La. The airport. We start getting closer and I tense up for that final dash to freedom and survival. Within 2 minutes, we were pulling up to the airport departure lane and I got out feeling more than a little dumbstruck. I didn't relax until I touched down in Hong Kong. I found out in the next few days that my Chinese buyers had been laughing at the danger they put me in, knowing they planned to fuck the deal anyways. I also found out that Kashif Ashraf, my supplier with the Colonel father, was a good man and true Muslim who believed in the old rules of hospitality, brotherhood, and compassion. He knew it was a fake money order and lied to his father to let me go home. I still feel I owe him to this day, and inshallah we can meet as friends again one day. TLDR, I was in Karachi twice. First time the police station got bombed followed by a massive street level gunfight just a couple blocks from my hotel. Second time I was held hostage by a scary ass colonel for almost a week before faking my way out with the help of a good Muslim man. Bua, Cameroon. Was having an awesome day with my mates, driving rented motorcycles into the mountains with no license. Great times. Then some policemen pull us over for failure to present yourself to an officer and throw my Cameroonian friend in jail, conveniently not willing to risk throwing me and the other white foreigners in jail. Jail was a 3x3 meter cell with about 10 people in it, some of whom had been there for over a month. Clearly a bribe was going to be necessary to fix this sheet. Went to the commander's office to sort it out. His office was full of hundreds of whiskey bottles strewn everywhere, and also a prostitute was in there with him. He informed me that he was off duty and I'd need to talk to a colleague at the bar next door. Went to the bar, found the guy, asked him what it would take to get my friend out. He said 10,000 CFA, about 10 GBP at the time. Told him we had a deal. He wanted me to give him the money in this dark corner where no one could see the exchange. I was thinking, fuck this. If I'm going to bribe this asshole, I at least want all of his colleagues to know what is happening. And I insisted we exchange in a well-lit place in front of his colleagues. At this point my Cameroonian friend was out of jail and standing next to us, and the cop says, "No, you are trying to disrespect me, the deal is off," and throws my friend back in jail and walks back to the bar. All of the above had taken many hours. I was exhausted and needed to just further there with my friends. So I went to the bar and asked the cop what it would take to get my friend out. He looks me straight in the eyes and says, "You disrespected me in front of my colleagues back there. There is a penalty for disrespecting an officer. The penalty is 2 beers. So I bought him his beers, gave him the 10 quid, and finally got my friend out of jail. It's a shame, because the areas around Bua, and Cameroon in general, are beautiful, but you get assholes like these corrupt cops bringing the place down, and making the very few travelers who have been there say nope, not worth going to. New Delhi, India. Decided to go there in 2008. Never going back again. It's crowded, polluted, and everyone is trying to rip you off the moment they find out you are a foreigner. I'm of Indian descent but Canadian. Even though I can fluently speak Hindi, I still speak it with a heavy accent, which can show you are not a native speaker. Suddenly my prices to visit touristy places would go from 50 rupees to 500 rupees the moment I opened my mouth. I'd come to my hotel from traveling during the day and wash my face, and see this black grime, from all the pollution, just spill all over the sink. There is no such thing as crossing a street. No one gives a fuck. I basically had to fear for my life if I had to cross a street, because the drivers are horrible and don't follow rules. It's fine on major intersections but smaller streets, you are faked. Oh, and the first and only time I was ever pickpocketed was on the Delhi metro. As grand and well planned and honestly beautiful it was, the stations are all massive compared to the ones in Toronto. It was still a shit show to get onto a train. Lining up and waiting to get onto a train is not a concept popular there, and my well-mannered Canadian dummers would politely let people in until there was no room for me. Also, the first time I ever threw up after drinking beer was also in the native country of my parents. Having safely ordered a Carlsberg, thinking it was brewed in Denmark, I got an upset stomach. Upon inquiring further, it was actually brewed locally with local water, and that completely faked up my system. It's honestly crowded, hot as fuck, disordered, and messy. And fucking Indira International Airport. On a flight from Nairobi, Kenya to Cairo, Egypt, our flight had to make an emergency landing in Khartoum, Sudan. The rest of the passengers on my flight were Hasidic Jews, and I'm not sure that's entirely relevant, but it did make the ordeal seem much more surreal. Our plane hit some terrifying turbulence, and it was announced that we had a technical issue and would be landing at the Khartoum airport. We were made to deplane. I was traveling alone and made an effort to keep to myself and blend in, but given that I was a young white woman traveling alone in sub-Saharan Africa, it was difficult. Somehow I caught the eye of security, who asked to see my passport and paperwork and began to hassle me about not having a certificate of proof for the yellow fever vaccine. I was told I would not be allowed to return to Nairobi without it, though I would be fine entering Cairo. I was told I must come with them so they could vaccinate me. I was taken into a back room in a building, detached from the main portion of the airport, and the security passed me over to a male nurse who already had a syringe in hand. I asked to see the bottle of the vaccine, but was told it had already been disposed of. This raised my suspicions, and I asked him if $20 would make this go away. He agreed, wrote and signed my yellow fever certificate, and sent me back to the waiting area. Never again, Sudan. Never again. Malta. My sister and I, from Germany, went there for a language holiday. I was around 14, she was 17. Originally planned to stay 3 weeks, but decided to leave after 2. Malta is basically a rock covered in moss and other depressing vegetation. It was 50°C, 122°F during the days and still very hot at night. We stayed with a lovely host family, but they didn't have an AC, only a ceiling fan in our room, which didn't do much. I had a sunstroke after only a few days in. My sister tells me I was talking nonsense during fever dreams at night. The food was mostly sandwiches, which I couldn't stand after a few days. Thin white toast with old vegetables that made it soggy. Also, the nausea from the sunstroke didn't help with my appetite. We had access to the beach of a private beach club as part of our booking. The beach consisted of a tiered concrete terrace with garbage covered rocks at the bottom, where it met the water. There also weren't enough sunshades for all the deck chairs, and staying there without one was impossible. English lessons weren't great either, especially when ill, but it was nice to stay in the classroom because of its working AC. The public transport was very frustrating. Timetables weren't exactly reliable. Waiting for buses in the glaring sun for half an hour wasn't very exciting. There were organized parties, but I had trouble enjoying myself and stayed at home when I could. So after 2 weeks of me being sick and my sister being worried sick, we decided to leave. The certificates that we got still said 3 weeks, so that's cool. Ultimately, I'm sure it was dumb of us to go in the summer. Even the Maltese said it was unusually hot. And I hear good things about Malta from other people. But to me and my sister, the place was a catastrophic failure on almost all accounts. Never again. P.S. This place, http://cornerfoodstore.com, saved us so many times. It was close to where we stayed. It had candy and ice cold sparkling water. I know, it's a German thing. Fresh fruits and tasty bread. Years later my sister gave me a framed picture she took of the storefront as a gift. This store was synonymous with hope for us. Mumbai and other cities in India. I generally enjoy experiencing the cultures of other countries. Not much gives me culture shock anymore. India really did a number on me, and many of my friends have reported similar experiences. I have met many lovely Indian people and I love Indian food. It's probably my favorite food, and I eat quite a bit of it living in New York City. I really don't mean to hate on India, but my experience sucked. I don't think I'd go back, even if the trip were free. Many cities were ridiculously dirty. I've never gagged so many time walking around a new country. I obviously felt bad for the people who have to live in those conditions, but good God was it hard to enjoy myself. Watching people cook your food and not wash their hands after leaving a restroom I know had no sink in it, especially when you know the custom that many people follow of wiping with one of their hands. It's not a fun experience. If you're not a fan of crowds, being hassled, being yelled at, being grabbed, and generally total chaos, don't go to India. I'm a guy, thank God, but my girlfriend was grabbed multiple times on public transportation and on the street. She was catcalled half a dozen times per day, even when I was holding her hand or by her side. It was explained to us that this is pretty normal behavior. It made it incredibly difficult to enjoy ourselves as we felt like we were always on the lookout. This is not to say there were not plenty of experiences and places we did enjoy, but because of the above overall our trip wasn't very positive. We wanted it to be so badly. India has so many beautiful experiences and places, but everything above puts quite the damper on the experience. Peshawar, Pakistan. Around 7 years ago my family took a trip to Islamabad, Pakistan to visit relatives. After about 2 weeks we planned a road trip to Afghanistan, also to visit family, which would require us to cross the border through one of many routes, and unfortunately the route we selected passed through Peshawar. The road trip was quite an experience, and for the most part bearable. My siblings and I did not have high expectations whatsoever, and were fond of how impoverished these regions were, so we could tolerate most of it fine. We got to try many different restaurants and nice food stands along the way, and some parts of the mountainous portions of Afghanistan were very beautiful. Upon entering Peshawar, it was as if all clean air just vanished instantly. You simply could not breathe properly here. The odor from outside was absolutely disgusting, and the region itself is incredibly hot. I quickly had to grab a towel to cover my face out of fear for my lungs disintegrating with every breath inhaled. Even then, it was absolutely intolerable. This region had absolutely nothing to offer. I can't imagine why someone would live there for more than a minute. Mosquitoes swarming around everywhere, no clean water, poor children climbing through trash piles in search of food, trucks carrying slaughtered animals and meat with blood pouring out the sides as they drove, not a single properly paved road. You'll be rocking left and right uncomfortably the entire drive with so much dust smacking your windshield you're just praying not to accidentally collide with anything out of fear for remaining there for any extended periods of time. This place was absolute hell, and we simply drove through it. I hope every person currently living there can overcome their financial obstacles and find a new place to reside, because nobody deserves to step foot in that place. One of the worst places imaginable. Actually, we should consider deporting any horrendous criminals over there and leave them for simply 10 to 15 minutes to wander about. It's all they would need before quickly realizing how unappreciative they are and how good the opportunities available to them in a modern society are. Peshawar, Pakistan, worst place I've ever been, and I doubt I'll find worse elsewhere. Mumbai. When I've had a bad day, I often think to myself, at least I'm not in Mumbai. I was really looking forward to going to India as it had been top of the list of places I wanted to go. There was thick smog everywhere. There were so many people living on the footpaths. I'm quite sure that most of the people I interacted with didn't have homes. Taxi drivers lived in their cars. Hotel security and concierges slept at their posts. There was shit and toxic pools everywhere. Tiny children holding tiny babies were everywhere and a group of them spent every night outside the hotel I was at. Going out was really expensive because any alcohol was more expensive in London prices. When my conference ended I went to a cheaper hotel. The cook was using the shower in my room when I arrived, and I saw a massive rat just before I went up the stairs in what looked like an abandoned building. I was there during the currency problems they were having. I couldn't get money from ATMs very often. When there was cash, it was only about £20 a day, which made everything a bit scary. Plus every single vendor was trying to rip you off by giving back the defunct currency. I had to leave my crap hotel after one night because I didn't have any money to pay them. I went back to a slightly nicer hotel that had a card machine. I went to Aurangabad for a few days and saw some pretty cool things, but the pollution there was even worse. Definitely Bali. I read up before I arrived of exactly how to stay safe, how to stay well, how not to get scammed or robbed. I even read that if a Balinese or Indonesian asks you how many times you've been to Bali before, to say many times, so they will think you are more street smart than you really are. And I figured, hey, I'm only here for 2 days, and one of those days is a wedding. What's the worst that can happen? After biting my fingernails for several days beforehand, because the nearby volcanoes were erupting and causing a week's worth of flights to be cancelled, finally we get confirmation that our flight is still on. Great. Arrived at the Bali Denpasar airport and had to pay $30 to enter the country. Annoying, I guess, but not a deal breaker. As I was leaving the airport I had to run the gauntlet of people offering to wheel my bag for me, drive me somewhere, possibly drive me into the middle of nowhere, and leave me for dead. I couldn't really hear over the cacophony of 1-ape taxi drivers. Get to the hired car, and we travel to the hotel. After the nightclubs in Bali were bombed in 2002, our hotel boasts anti-terrorism security that lifts the barrier arm for any vehicle that comes in. After checking in, dropping off our bags, and, stupidly, drinking the complimentary drink which has ice in it, we get back into the van to go to a restaurant suggested by the driver. He probably gets a kickback. The food was alright, but I can get cheaper and better Indonesian food in Australia. So we get back into the van afterwards and ask the driver where he can take us as it's starting to get to evening and we want to see something nice. He suggests a shopping mall. No, we want to see something nice, not a shopping center. How about the sandbar? He tells us it's too far and the sun will set before we arrive. We tell him to go anyway and we arrive well before sunset. He was just being lazy. So we sit at the beach and it's actually quite pleasant, despite ordering a $10 bintang beer, and it comes in a bottle. I was expecting a pint for that price. When we get back to the hotel I order room service and we take the food to sit on the balcony, and within a few minutes we are back inside because we're being attacked by mosquitoes. The next morning we decide to go out for a walk. We can barely walk 20 meters without being accosted by somebody trying to give us something or encourage us to get in their unlicensed taxi. I made the mistake of taking something offered to me, noticing that the hotel name on the brochure, which I realized looked a bit like a package, was different to the hotel name on the man's shirt. Anyway, I've taken this brochure/package and walked away, and the man shouts after me and then comes riding along in his scooter trying to talk in Indonesian to me, so I give him his brochure back. No idea what was in the package, if anything, but I'm very glad I gave it back. We walk to a beach. That would be nice if the sand wasn't obviously polluted. So we walk into town to look at the shops. It's a hot humid day. More scammers trying to get us to take rides. Shopkeepers calling out Aussie, come in and look. We do actually go into a shop. It has air conditioning, but it's not cool at all. I break out in a massive sweat as soon as I walk in because the air conditioner is only removing the humidity from the air. After only a few minutes I'm massively dehydrated and feel like I'm in serious trouble. I have travel insurance, but the last thing I want to do is end off in the Bali emergency room along with all the Aussies who've been caught up in fights. Fortunately the convenience store is only 50 meters away, so I struggle to walk there and we buy some water and sports drink. I sit down and get as much into me as I can before we walk back and presently I start to feel better. That was a close one. After a swim in the hotel's pool, we get ready for the wedding. The hired transport takes us there, past depressing shacks, made of friable asbestos for a solid hour, to a really nice resort which has its own wedding chapel. It's stunning. It doesn't exist anymore. It closed last year. After several hours the bus takes us back, and we have to endure an hour of one of the wedding guests being totally drunk and trying to rap. He's a white Australian. We pass by the drunk Aussie area, cuter, on the way back. There's a gay club with no front wall, so we can actually see right inside. A nearly naked man is thrusting his hips on stage, and the words "I love BJ" are projected on the screen behind him. How classy, and that's just what we wanted to see after a wedding. As the van winds its way through the streets of Kuta we see Aussies getting drunk, swearing and behaving like total tools. I even apologized to the Indonesian driver for their behavior. We finally arrive back at the hotel, make our way through the lax security again, and go to bed. The next morning my stomach feels crap. I barely get any food into me, because I feel like I'm about to vomit. Not a hangover. I stayed sober last night. It's food poisoning, even though I was quite careful, and I curse my stupidity for drinking the complimentary welcoming drink at the hotel. My partner goes to the hotel reception to ask if they have any medicine, and they give her antacids. No, that's not going to do much. I try to check out of the hotel but can't. I'm barely leaving the toilet by now. No way are we going to be able to take the van to Uber to sightsee this morning. The hotel allows me to stay for another couple of hours in the room, and we stay in the transit lounge watching TV for a few more hours while waiting for the driver to come and take us to the airport to leave this hellhole. Fortunately, the transit lounge has heaps of toilets and free water. I needed both. The story doesn't quite end there. We, along with the bride and groom, went straight to Singapore. Because of the beating my stomach had taken, I was barely able to eat anything for the next few days, and the food in Singapore was good. My unusually tiny appetite caused my partner to think that I hated Singapore and hated Asian food, and we had a big fight. I could show you some great photographs of us at Singapore's best tourist attractions. Frowning. The bride and groom had a worse time. The bride got an inflamed intestine and had to go to hospital, and by the time she was well enough to go outside without clutching her belly in pain, the honeymoon was over. I had never wanted to go to Bali, but leading up to the trip I had started to become a bit more enthusiastic. Afterwards, though, I can say it was the worst holiday I'd ever been on. I never want to go back. Faking Heathrow Airport. I'm never flying to London again. Short story: got detained by a creepy guard and sent back 24 hours later because he was a faking creep. Long faking story: fly from USA to Heathrow and am waiting for customs. Friend is taking me on a vacation because it's nearly my birthday and my favorite band is playing. I get caught and show my passport, hotel, etc. Guy asks me what I'm doing there. I say vacation, birthday trip, etc. Asks my plans. I say the few I can remember. Frankly, I don't remember everything because it's my first time and I haven't memorized them. I offer to show my itinerary. He declines. He decides I'm at risk for human trafficking and at one point suggests that I'm getting this trip because I'll be faking my friend. I show him the emails between my friend and I. There's no suggestion or hint of that anywhere. The guy leads me into a hall, away from cameras, saying you owe him. It's going to happen, regardless if you say it isn't. I'm clarify if he means rap, or that I'm lying. He suggests rap, but not really rap, because this guy spent money on me, therefore I owe him. While I'm in holding I ask the guards about the laws of consent in the UK, and explain that the guards seem to be advocating rap, and I'm a little worried about my safety. Fast forward to interrogation. The guy raises his voice asking why I was asking about the laws. During holding someone takes my luggage. He asks about my missing luggage and wants to know what I had in it as they've just recovered it. I list out medication, jeans, sweaters, books, tampons, pads, and of course toiletries. He leans in to ask, am I going to find any sexy underwear? I'm appalled and reply yes, there are undergarments, but nothing extreme. When I inquire about my luggage, it turns out that they don't have it because it was sent to my hotel before they noticed it had arrived. When I'm returned to holding, the guard tells me to download WhatsApp so he can personally contact me about my luggage. He goes on to tell me it's fate that I wasn't allowed and to thank God I'm atheist. The best part, next time I should return with a husband. The complaints box in the holding center was a suggestions box tacked to the wall that they didn't open till the next morning. The holding center had good curry, fresh oranges, nice people, and a tea machine, but the shower was cold and low pressure. Fuck you, Heathrow. I was born around Mumbai, but moved to North America when I was almost 5. I've been back a few times. I've also gone to tons of other countries, but India is by far the most tiresome for me. Hygiene is a pretty huge problem in much of India. If you are a germaphobe, you probably shouldn't go there. Homes are pretty clean, but all of a sudden people don't seem to care about littering once they step outside their homes. Traffic in India makes me feel misery like I've never felt before. All of this is further aggravated by the fact that I have grown to really like temperate climates and absolutely hate the humidity and high temperatures of a good portion of the country. Beyond that, there is also just general pollution and actual fear of potentially getting horrifically sick if you accidentally drink water or eat food from somewhere you really shouldn't have. Don't get me wrong, a lot about Indian culture and people is fascinating, and places like Kashmir are really beautiful. Sadly not that safe anymore though, but it's not some place I would want to go back to really. The people are generally pretty nice, but seem oddly shallow to me in weird ways, but that's probably just cultural difference with what I've grown up with. It is true that most people have pretty backward notions about things like morality, marriage, and such, which is pretty sad. Poipet in Cambodia, border town with Thailand. I already knew it was going to be shitty, but thought I was prepared for it. Not quite. So me and my girlfriend decided to take the train from Bangkok to Cambodia. Only downside would be the border at Poipet and getting a ride to Siem Reap from there. The train ride was beautiful. Leaving very early in the morning, seeing Bangkok wake up, people cooking breakfast just a few meters from the tracks, wind blowing in my face through the open window, was very enjoyable after a few days in a hot and humid city. The changing countryside towards Cambodia was amazing. No problems getting a fairly priced tuk-tuk from the final train station all the way to the border. Exiting Thailand into no man's land also not a problem. Loads of casinos, but only a few 100 meters walk to the Cambodian border, so no problem. We ordered our visa in advance, so got through customs easily. Then it started. The minute you exit the customs office on the Cambodian side, you're swarmed by men trying to sell you a bus ride to Siem Reap. I knew these bus rides didn't actually go all the way to Siem Reap, but to some bus depot outside of the city where you were forced to take a very overpriced taxi into the city. So we decided to stay the night in Poipet and try to get a fairly priced ride early in the morning. The hotel we are planning to stay in is just 1 kilometer, so easy to walk. No? Not really. My girlfriend is done with the heat and walking and wants a ride, so I have to find a tuk-tuk or taxi because she refuses to take one of the many mope/scooter taxis. Long story short, the following events unfold. Paying a shady guy on a scooter some $sign to find us a tuk-tuk driver wants to take us to the bus station. Takes a lot of convincing to take us to the hotel instead. Ride to the hotel in tuk-tuk, being followed by shady scooter guy who wants more money. Hotel staff almost gets in a fight with shady scooter guy. To get him to fuck off, we get a smelly room on a 4th floor, elevators broken, OFC, stained sheets, and neighbors who are having a gambling/hooker party, but we are off the streets for now, so W/E. Around dinner time, the Poipet police, Akabus/taxi mafia, gather at our hotel for dinner, the very people we are trying to avoid getting scammed by. In the morning we get an unmarked cab for a fair price. He picks up some more people, all the while trying to avoid the cops. Transporting tourists without paying the police their cut can get him in serious trouble. but we arrive in Siem Reap safely. Even though the driver almost fell asleep a few times. Hahabachier. Poipet is a hellhole, stay away. Sort of a mixed bag for me, but Dublin, Ireland and also Belfast, Northern Ireland. I don't want to discourage people from coming here necessarily. We have great bars and nightlife and extremely interesting history. Maybe I'm biased, but lots of people take an interest. I'm from Dublin. I've lived here my entire life. Grew up in my mother's family home in an area that used to be quiet, surrounded by farmland, and in slow development. By the time I was born, it was one of the most crime-ridden parts of a city with a lot of crime. My next door neighbors were notorious gangland criminals with dangerous fighting dogs which killed several pets in the area and mauled a teenage girl. We unfortunately had to leave because the council would do nothing about these people. Dublin is known as the heroin capital of Europe for a reason. One good thing about here is that we have excellent bus services. But many mornings on my way into college, the people in the seats behind me are casually just faking shooting up at 9 AM. Everywhere you go in the city center there are junkies and addicts begging money, being generally loud or threatening, fighting in public or passed out. Belfast, well, as I have an Irish accent, there are certain parts of Belfast that I'm genuinely not safe in. For those who don't know, as recently as the 70s and 80s there was what was called the Troubles where Catholics, usually Roy nationalists, and Protestants, Brits, or what are considered Brits by nationalists, basically warred with each other. The IRA carried out terrorist acts here and in the UK, and the British Army basically did too, but since they were an official army it was considered more legitimate. Catholic kids had to go to school in armored school buses if they traveled through a Protestant area and vice versa. Now things are supposedly settled, but there are still huge tensions all over Northern Ireland, especially Belfast. Going to the wrong area as an Roy person with Irish accent, or British person with say English accent, could get you attacked. My stepfather is English, and it made traveling up there pretty tense. The lady who ran the B&B we stayed in warned us away from certain areas and pubs. It was all a shame, because I genuinely love Belfast. It's a beautiful city with again, a really interesting past. Pecos, Texas. The only reason we ended up there was because we hit an armadillo that blew our tire. So we put the spare on and take a relatively cheap motel as we come into town to wait till morning when the tire place opens. My brother and I viewed 5 rooms before taking one. Now this alone should have told me to look for another motel, but whatever. The lady at the desk opens room number 1, and there has to be hundreds upon hundreds of flies everywhere in there. When I told her I wanted a different room she was actually surprised. Go room number 2. She opens the door, and there's a smell, a rank, unique, horrid ungodly wet smell. I walked in, I walked out, I noped. What's behind door number 3? Actually, what's wrong with door number 3? Both locks, bolt, and chain were broken and the handle wobbled so bad I thought it was gonna fall off. Next. Anyway, I eventually settled on a room which my bro and I share. Well, one of the beds turns out to be really dirty under the covers, so we share a bed. However, these covers have so many stains we don't even use them, just toss them in a corner. We are also a little freaked out from the locals. Some shade people live in this motel, as we witnessed pulling in. So we take every piece of furniture and barricade the door, faking solid. And I'm glad we did. Laying there at 2 in the morning, wrapped in our hoodies, watching TV, we hear people walking around shouting. Someone starts banging on our door, then tries the handle. It's jiggling. They press their face against the window. Eventually they leave. This happens again a few hours later. Needless to say we didn't get a wink. In the morning we hit the tire shop. They fix our rim and tire good enough to drive on, and we get the fuck out to Dodge. These 2 nice Canadian boys will never go near Pecos, Texas again. That place should be banned for morbid. I can think of a couple places I've come across that scream what the fuck never again. How did I think this was a good idea? But even now there's indelible, almost fond memories of them. One that stands out, several years back, traveling on a kind of honeymoon trip with my now ex-wife. The whole trip was a compromise of sorts. A road trip through the western USA that included the Pacific Coast Highway, redwoods, the freaky deaky geology of the Southwest for me, and Disneyland and Vegas and malls and stuff for her. Just after a stellar trip through Northern California, Monterey Bay and Big Sur, I had found us a campground that fit the bill for driving distance for the day, and, bonus, according to whatever guidebook I had, it was right on the ocean. So we get near San Luis Obispo, and navigate our way through bland suburbs, and tired strip malls, and end up finding a parking lot with a sign that proclaimed it as a state park. I can't recall its name, but a search on Google Maps suggests it might have been Morro Strand State Campground. So, I bumble in the loaded Subaru, a bit burnt out from a big day of driving, and immediately drive in through the outdoor right in front of a cop, who was parked there with his window down. "Sir, you can't come in this way, sir. Where do you think you're going? You can't drive this way, sir." So I pull out my best Saskatchewan good old boy dialect and say, "Oh, is it right? Sorry about that. We are a little lost, big ol' shucks," smile, at which point he completely warmed up, chatted a bit, and helpfully pointed us to the campsite, which was a goddamn paved parking lot. Literally, the 10 sites advertised in whatever book we had were in actuality a little gravel patch between the pavement and a chain link fence that was there to keep us from stumbling onto the tracks of a very busy commuter train line. And the place was jam-packed full. Huzzah for us. So we set up camp, eat some shitty hot dogs, and try to settle in, while the multi-family group across the parking lot partied and hooted, and their loosely disciplined kids took turns launching their electric razor scooters over the speed bumps in the parking lot. The train passed through, horn and all, about every hour or so all night long. Sometime just before settling in, I made my way to the prison quality bathrooms for a wee and toothbrushing, and I decided, fuck it, let's go find this so-called Pacific Ocean. So I bravely wandered barefoot down a little path, stepped in some tar seeps along the way, California beaches represent, and had a gander at all the offshore oil rigs lit up like Christmas. And then witnessed one of the coolest natural phenomenons I've ever seen. Bioluminescence. And lots of it. Every breaking wave was glowing neon blue at its crest. Each one seemingly more intense than the last. At first I thought the train and the scooter kids, or my ex, had finally driven me around the twist. But, nope, there it goes again and again. I've never seen anything like it before or since. I even convinced the wife to get out of her age sack sleeping bag to come down to the beach and see. She was blown away too if it weren't for the shitty campsite, loud train, louder campers, and, oh yeah, the windowless box van parked next to us that fired up its poorly running 80s-era diesel V8 to warm up for half an hour at 4:30 am. If it weren't for all that, I would have never seen glowing waves breaking on the beach. As Neil Peart once said, adventures suck when you're having them. Didn't see it below. Vietnam. I'm sure it's just a personal experience, but I found it so unpleasant. Rubbish and filth, all kinds, everywhere. Everything felt half-assed and run down. Tons of homeless people, though homeless/shed people with massive Rolls-Royce cars seemed to be a common thing. Casual racism to outsiders, zero animals or wildlife. I'm sure a lot of it is down to a history of war and invasion, so a cultural why bother to creating space and creative architecture or something perhaps, but it wasn't for me. The one thing that sticks in my mind was visiting a night market in Hanoi and seeing a man selling bright rainbow-colored piles of rice. It was the first neat thing I'd seen, and I tried to take a picture and the man just got up in my face and aggressive. "You're selling dyed rice. What trade secrets am I, an obvious witty, going to steal?" It was towards the end of the trip and just sealed my experience of people being horribly suspicious and tight-fisted. Either he genuinely thought I was going to steal his secret somehow with a photo from 10 feet away, or he didn't want me taking a photo without paying him money first. Another is visiting the center of Hanoi and their sacred lake. It's a national legend that when the Chinese invaded again, a deity/magical turtle appeared and gave magical sword to their leader, who used it to beat back the Chinese. Now the turtle did live in that lake, but the Hanoians dumped so much crap, literal and metaphorical, in the lake it became too toxic, and they had to move the turtle elsewhere because it nearly died. Vietnam actually nearly killed their eel, worshipped being by throwing rubbish in its home. For anyone who does go there though, I definitely recommend visiting Saigon and Hanoi. The north and south are like two separate countries, they are so different. The easiest visible difference is in coconuts. North Vietnam you'll just see empty coconuts littering everywhere, on the side of roads, on the floor, in the gutter, in the lakes, and in rotting piles. In South V you'll see a pile of coconut husks drying, with a pile of coconut shells next to them, the meat all scooped out, so they don't rot. It just seems to be a different mentality towards life. Carlsbad NM. The city was the worst. A guy at Whole Foods in Austin told me I should check out Carlsbad Caverns when I headed west on my road trip. I had never heard of them, so I said what the hell, and made a detour. Thing is they had an oil boom when I was there, so major oil companies had rented every hotel room. There were 4 guys to a room in the hotels, so they could charge $500 a night. I was about 50 miles outside of town when I looked up hotel rooms. I was like, that can't be right. I got to town and sure enough, ended up deciding I'd sleep in the Walmart parking lot in my Mustang. Went inside for snacks. The store looked like a post-apocalyptic scene. This was discerning after every Walmart I have been into in my life was somewhat organized. Got my snacks and settled in to sleep in the lot. Did it a few times on that trip, so it wasn't a big deal. After the 3rd car pulled up to me in the parking lot thinking I was the person they were supposed to sell meth to, I decided to go to a bar. At said bar I met Vince. Vince was nice and hospitable knowing I was just road tripping after college. He said if I needed somewhere to crash I could come back to his place. He said it was a big 4-bedroom and it was just him and his wife. When we got there I realized he meant he and his wife lived in the garage next to a 4-bedroom. Things got dicey when he asked me if I wanted to see his knife collection. I did what any guest would do and said hell yes. Didn't get weird until I realized his wife walked out of the small bathroom at the back of the garage in a spaghetti strap with full makeup on at 3 AM and Vince said honey let's put on the good bedspread. Vince wanted me to bang his wife in front of him. Things got tense. I finished my warm Miller Lite and looked for an exit. As I showed myself out through the door with one of those shoe organizers hanging on the door full of ketchup, mustard and all kinds of condiments, Vince followed persistently. Almost begged me to stay. I'm a people pleaser, but in this one instance I elected to cut my losses. Always thankful to meet helpful people when couch surfing, but cucking isn't my thing. Walmart 2/10 knife collection 10/10 lodging / cucking 1/10 Carlsbad Caverns 10/10 would do it all again. Utah. My best friend lives here. Military. I and my wife moved here to help care for his house and help his wife while he's deployed. I've been here several times on vacation to visit him since he moved here. This state has wonderful scenery, lots of awesome parks both in and around the state, and there is plenty to do besides hike and camp if you are not an outdoorsy type. That being said, we moved here to help one of my all-time best friends, something I'd do again in a heartbeat. Aside from that, Utah faking blows. It's dry as shit. Everything during the summer is on fire. It's a dry state, so no liquor sales on Sundays. The roads are always under construction. There are not enough trees. The sun is almost always out during summer, so no clouds 98% of the time. Their drivers are psychopaths who'd happily run you off the road sooner than check a mirror or attempt to use turn signals. And to top it all off, faking Mormons. Everywhere. Temples in almost every major city, churches on damn near every other block, and fuck 'em if they don't think they run everyone else's lives. I once had some Mormon fella at O'Reilly Auto Parts get upset because I said my damn air compressor seized in a light-hearted attempt at morbid humor. He was mad because I said damn, fucking Mormons. Once my wife and I, move back Midwest, I'll never live in this shithole again. Mormons. Barbados. Beautiful beaches but horrible experience. We were on a cruise and decided to go look around the port. We were shopping and a local shop owner told my husband, and I do not trust anyone here. They will fuck you, and we were like huh. With that in mind, we did decide to do our own excursion with help from the local taxi driver. He made us wait an hour in the back of a van with no account and 8 other people. The van was full, but he insisted that we could get 2 more on. We would have gotten off, but we were in the way back, and the people in front of us didn't speak English, so we were kinda stuck. He finally gave up and we left. He dropped us off at a famous beach. As soon as we got there, we put our stuff down, and some random guy came up to my husband. He told us not to leave our stuff, because local thieves have kids run and take our stuff. So we brought it with us to the shore. The same guy came up to us and tried to bribe us on getting onto his ship, which was nowhere to be seen. Wouldn't leave us alone, so we decided to move down. Comes time to leave, taxi driver never showed, so we walked 7 miles back to our cruise ship dock. Other taxi drivers stopped, but they wanted $80 or $100, even when they were full with other riders. We said fuck it, and walked back in 100-degree heat wearing nothing but our swimsuits, sandals, and towels. It was honestly probably the worst experience traveling. It's a beautiful place to see, but it seems everyone wants your money and doesn't want to genuinely help you. That and there are emaciated dogs everywhere. I tried to feed one on our walk back and got yelled at for it. So who knows what's going on, but I'll never be back there. As someone who loves traveling and wants to visit basically everywhere in the world, this thread is awfully depressing. But you are also getting everyone's worst case story in here, I suppose. The worst place I ever went was a sketchy liquor store in Queens, where I thought I was legitimately gonna be murdered or violently assaulted, but that's not really a travel destination. So, Romania. I was close to Romania last Halloween and thought, oh Transylvania, I'm sure there'll be something cool, or like a carnival sort of thing, right? No, there isn't. There's a crappy Halloween party in Dracula's castle, which is not Dracula's castle, that consists of standing 2+ hours in line in the cold day castle tour. The castle was so crowded that it was basically just standing in line for another 2 hours trying to get through the narrow paths. Nothing particularly exciting to see, and still freezing cold. After the tour you get a few drinks, and then you can go to the party if you wish, which was actually not terrible, but it was in a tent below the castle, not actually in the castle. At least the tent was warm. Also I was sick, and had the sheets the entire time I was in that region of Europe. Also I had taken 3 trains to get there, one of which was overpass, and I was not given a seat, although half the train got off like 2 hours in, so I was able to snag one. Honestly though, I'd still give Romania another chance. I went to Bucharest to sleep it off, and I was the only one staying at this hostel. The hostel was way out on the metro line in a huge apartment complex, but run by one of the nicest people I've ever met, although I basically just slept the entire time to get healthy. Plus this is my worst travel experience and I've been a fair amount of places, so I feel pretty lucky with the rap and paralyzation stories on here. And it's one of those it's funny to tell the story looking back on it, even if it sucked at the time deals. Oh, also Nassau is pretty crappy too. My friends didn't want to do any of the off-cruise paid activities, so we just got off the boat. I took literally nothing with me besides the ID to get back on the ship and a few dollars in case I got mugged, and put the ID in my shoe. I was so paranoid. Probably 95 degrees with 95% humidity. It was basically the typical touristy scam stuff, where the cruise ships dock, lots of people yelling at you, and we walked a little further and bought some crappy souvenirs, and then my friends wanted to go back to the ship because it's getting too black now. Then I decided to start solo traveling. Cairo. I loved that I got to see it, but I never need to go back. The pollution was staggering. Some days we couldn't see 10 feet in front of us due to the smog on painfully hot days. My brother-in-law, mid-30s and in good shape, had to stay in the hotel some days as he has mild asthma and would basically suffocate out the city air. We were involved in 2 taxi accidents as the general driving conditions and streets are atrocious, and they have little to no driving rules. The water is so dirty you can't even brush your teeth with it, and we were in a 5-star hotel and they advised us only to showing with it. Many buildings are left unfinished due to a bizarre law that means tax is due when it's finished, so they just add another floor and leave that incomplete until a new owner takes it and has to do the same. Our pre-arranged guide tried scam us, so did the hotel driver and front desk. Many of the people were absolutely lovely, and especially so when we got out of Cairo to the other parts of Egypt, but in the whole you had to watch for scammers the whole time in Cairo. The street sellers were the most aggressive I've ever witnessed, and one time, where I didn't entertain it as I was sick of it, and politely told them in Arabic we're not interested, and to leave us alone, they got aggressive. Again, glad I got to see such a historic and vibrant city, but not somewhere I'm desperate to go back to. Lucknow, India. My friend and I were stupid and thought we could get to Pokhara in Nepal from Rishikesh, which is something like 600 kilometers away. That turned into a 3-day bullshit fest, but whatever, that's another story. So, we took our first train from Haridwar to Lucknow, got off, and then made our way to the bus station for our trip to Nepalganj, the town on the border. Saw a dead dog lying in the middle of the street, but it's early in the morning, so all the parts are still intact. In hindsight, this was an omen of the day to come. So, we make it to the bus station, but the axle broke on our bus, so we have to wait until the evening bus. What to do in this city we only assumed would be a transit stop. I pull up a map on my phone to see how we can kill time, and, behold, there's a lovely park nearby. We take a rickshaw to the park, but it's been repurposed into an open-air trash heap. Okay, whatever. We then go to the nearest sweet shop and buy some sweets and bottled water, playing cards to pass the time as we eat. We are kicked out of the shop because our cards are Kamasatra themed. Our bad. Rickshaw back to the bus station, see the same dead dog, only this time it's been torn to shreds because it's now around noon and multiple cars/rickshaws/cows have run it over. Around this time we decide Lucknow really isn't for us. Now that we are back, we sit around the cantina in the bus station eating food and playing more cards. Locals try to steal our bags at one point, we chase them off. Other locals beg for money, same deal. Finally, we get on a bus, and a bunch of men yells at us for about 10 minutes, apparently because a couple wants the seats we are in. I don't know exactly, I don't speak Hindi. So we get off this bus, and it turns out to be the wrong one anyway, so that's good. Wait a few more hours, eat more at the cantina, play some more cards. Finally, we get on the right bus, and make it out of the city. Never again. Honestly, Thailand. Did 4.5 months in Asia, 1 month in Vietnam, 1.5 Indonesia and 2 separate 1-month stints in Thailand. Fell in love with a small island called Koh Tao in the Gulf of Thailand and really enjoyed my time there. However, the rest of Thailand was a faking slog. It is picturesque country, lush, diverse, eclectic, vibrant, and the food is delicious. But since tourism is such a major part of their economy, every single person is trying to get their piece at every turn. You sit down in a cab that will cost 100 baht on the meter. They will try to get you to agree to a rate 4 times as high, or make up a bogus fee. Buying a bus ticket, you'll pay twice as much as a local. Getting change for just about anything, you better count it. People constantly waving you into their shops, heckling you by their wares, and visibly offended when you don't flash the cash, or when you try to barter. It becomes tiresome after a while. And for anyone there for a short period of time, the positives will definitely outweigh the annoyances. But after a while there, I got tired of being treated like a faking $sign, because I was white. Vietnam and Indonesia I didn't find to be like this, by the way. Vietnamese were usually interested why we were there and thought it was kind of cool, and Indonesia was big enough to have other things supporting their country, so people weren't as desperate around tourists. Might be late to party, but here is my place I'd never want to go again. China, quite frankly one of the worst countries I've ever lived in. I lived there for 2 years. I will however say that some of the people I've met there were generally really nice people, but they are few and far between. The general population are completely uneducated and have absolutely no filter whatsoever, let alone their superiority complex issues in that society. I'm also going to mention everybody seems to lie, cheat and steal in that country. Business, schools and social/love life, it really does not matter there. Not to mention they are incredibly racist and said the most disgusting things about other nations and how they warmonger towards specific countries. Most nations would agree, if China went to war they would lose horribly, but they honestly believe they have a overpowering edge over the US forces and her allies. Disclosure, I'm not from the US. China to me is just another North Korea, but without the threat of nuclear weapons. Yes, I know they have them, but they don't go on TV threatening to blow up the US and her allies. China won't admit this, but they are a third world country, developing if you're being super PC about it. And although they are the world's factory, all this money has done is given Chinese people an ability to travel and buy luxury goods, but they have no social abilities that the rest of first world understands. Munich Airport. I was there in transit. We arrived early along with another international flight, full of Chinese tourists. This is relevant. We had to follow the long road through a few staircases and a corridor through to check-in area. This long corridor ended in a long escalator, which took us down to a large room, where the counters were. I'm about halfway down the escalator, when I notice a commotion at the bottom. The people before us were so slow to get through the door leading to the check-in area, that the people coming down the escalator had no space to get off. So everyone was pushing and shoving, and there appeared to be no sign of an emergency stop button. In the end, we avoided a major accident, although this was a totally avoidable situation, which was not managed by anyone. No airport staff around. Next, we had to line up in front of the available counters. There was about 10 of them, and only about 3 were staffed. So hundreds of people waiting to be processed, and it was taking forever, because they were taking headshots and fingerprints of the Chinese tourists. I assume a part of the immigration policy, depending on your passport, plus there were some language barriers, so a few translators were helping out. The room was big, but it was getting hot, and I started to feel faint. Too many people, even for an area that size. Meanwhile, there are airport staff walking around not opening more counters, just watching, smirking to themselves, like they were enjoying the chaos. Finally, after taking their sweet time, they opened a few more counters. It still took an hour and a half to get through that one line 0/10 would not recommend. East Hastings, Vancouver. I stayed in a hotel there for a week. Thanks British Council who sent me there, for being so damn cheap, back in 2010/11 sort of time period. It made me feel sad more than anything. All the homeless people in Canada head to Vancouver, because the winters are relatively mild, and then they all end up in East Hastings. It is the poorest neighborhood in Canada, and explains why the rest of Canada is so nice in comparison. All the bad is in a few blocks just outside central Vancouver. I'm from Manchester in the UK, so I'm used to seeing some poor areas, and I'm relatively streetwise. I know how to spot if somebody is likely carrying a gun or a knife. This district pushed me to my limits a bit though. There wasn't a single moment I wasn't making dealers and pimps looking after their territory when there. There were 2 moments that struck home how messed up it really was. An old woman saying to a girl, who had all the hallmarks of a drug-addicted working girl, behind me at a crossing, "Do you want to buy my blanket for $1? And the girl replying, "I can't afford it." The police museum is in the district and they recommend you do not travel there on foot. It might be nice for the people of Montreal and Toronto to not have to think about homeless people quite so much, but that week was the moment I realized Canada really needed to sort its shit out. Manila, Philippines. I've been living in Manila for over a year now. I hate this city. The airport, a corrupt, decaying, badly designed hellhole, is just the beginning. Manila is an ugly, concrete jungle that, to quote Claire Danes, smells like cockroaches. There is grinding, heartbreaking poverty everywhere. It's got the worst infrastructure and worst traffic congestion of any city I've ever visited, and I've been to 12 countries across Asia. Hey, have you ever wondered why you see Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, Thai, Korean, and Indian restaurants in every city in the world, but rarely, if ever, Filipino restaurants? It's 'cause Filipino food sucks. I apologize to all my Filipino friends, but the food is goddamn awful. Greasy, oily, unhealthy, flavorless crap. As Lonely Planet once described it, unimaginative and unrefined. Any non-Filipino who says they enjoy Filipino food, I'm looking at you. Anthony Bourdain, is just being polite. Want a decent meal? Prepare to pay through the nose. We are talking twice as expensive as a Western restaurant, and still be disappointed, no matter what the cuisine. I can count on one hand the amount of good restaurants here. What else? Fast food outlets and depressing strip malls full of American chains are everywhere. Sterile shopping malls are the only attractions. There are a handful of badly maintained museums. The historical quarter is a pile of bricks and a wall, which, surprise, is badly maintained, yet you still have to pay to see it. Classic Manila. Welcome to the Shi Chow. Now pay me $5. And it's only getting worse each day. They are getting rid of Uber and Grab because corruption, so now I'm going to have to battle with dishonest incompetent taxi drivers to get from A to B every day. Literally counting down the days until I can leave here and will never ever return. Manila does have decent nightlife if you know where to go. The rest of the country is nice, and Filipinos are wonderful people. Truly beautiful women too. Tijuana, Mexico. A friend, myself, and her mother went to San Diego for spring break. When we were seniors in high school, we decided to go to Tijuana on one of our last nights there. This was before you needed a passport to hop over the border. Oh, I forgot to mention that we went at the suggestion of this waiter that served us earlier that day at this super fancy restaurant in La Jolla. My friend's mom, being the nut job that she is, invited the waiter to go with us. Who does that? So, the four of us went to Tijuana that night. Long story short, her mother, who was still married to her father, who stayed back home, was busted faking said waiter in the corner of a club. My drink was drugged, and I was sexually abused by a fellow American spring breaker that I had been chatting/dancing with all night. My poor friend was stone cold sober and had to babysit the two of us. I have never been so faked up in my life. We left the waiter at the club and took a taxi back to the border. While at the checkpoint, my friend was questioned up and down, and we almost were not allowed back over the border because of how erratic her mother and I were. Once over the border, we spent hours looking for our rental car among a sea of cars in this huge parking lot. Her mother and I sat in the back seat while my friend berated us from the driver's seat. While she drove us back to the hotel, I puked out one window while her mother puked out the other. The whole way back we passed out on the floor just inside the door to our hotel room. The air was so thick the next day, you could cut it with a knife. The girl and I are no longer friends, but to this day, her father still has no idea what happened. While the three of us went on a little girls trip for spring break, it was the worst trip of my life. Not only do I think of that night when I think of Tijuana, but I remember how filthy the place was. The people were so scuzzy, it was so bizarre. Granted, this was back in 2001, so perhaps it's changed, but I don't want to go back to find out. /edited for clarity. Poprad, Slovakia. My friend and I were backpacking around Central/Eastern Europe and had spent 3 days in the Tatry Mountains and were on our way to Budapest, but figured we would stop for a night in Poprad and possibly visit a castle nearby. So shitty not even our Lonely Planet book could recommend a place to stay there. We booked a night through Hostel World, and when we got there we were told to talk to someone in the restaurant next door because the owner of the hostel was away. The place was not a hostel. It was very evident that people had been living there for an extended period of time because there was a TV from the 1990s and a fridge full of moldy food. The place was absolutely disgusting. As young female travelers, we were terrified, so we locked our backpacks in a closet and found a nearby cafe. There we booked a hostel last minute, retrieved our things, and made our way back to the train station where we exchanged our tickets to leave to Budapest that evening. We also later witnessed 3 questionable men enter the hostel. Poprad was dead with nothing to do but serve as a halfway point to Budapest. Johannesburg, RSA. Flying in over the gold dumps, I was like, oh hey, I guess we've arrived at GD Prime. Traffic from the airport to our hotel in Sandton was a nightmare. 2 hours to go, 15 miles tops. The hotel was a fortress worthy of a goatee locale, the Saxon, in Sandton. 20-foot walls, hard-pressing security outside, and a sense of isolation once inside. Damn nice hotel. Room was 2000 SF-ish, but just nothing like the outside world. We had driven through Alexandra to get there, so when my wife suggested we do a tour of Soweto, I was like, yeah, we've seen that already, no thanks. You couldn't walk anywhere to get anything. I needed a USB-C charger. The hotel was nice enough to send someone out to a mall for one for me. Every street was walls. That was our first swing through. On our second swing through, we had 10 hours to kill, so instead of hanging out at Ortambo, we took the GO train downtown to Park Station to do the City Hopper tour. Well, the tour stopped running from there, but oh boy did we get a slice of life. Never felt totally unsafe, but the area around there was just not in the I would like to walk this street area and hang out level of existence. Saw the Apartheid Museum, was quite interesting. Definitely saw some scary parallels between the Afrikaner elections in the 1930s and Trump's election this past year. Train got us back okay. Rosebank wasn't terrible, but yeah, never going through Joburg again. I've heard Cape Town is less safe, but we walked the streets at night there in Bokab and went to bars and restaurants and never saw issues. And we were there for 3 nights. Rome. Unlike the rest of my trip through Europe, I got trapped in the most commercial and tourist-y parts of the city, so that may play a part in why I'll never go back, but here goes. People dumping chamber pots out of second-story windows during the day onto busy streets. Keep in mind this was 2006. The Colosseum was just a huge trash pit. Locals brought bags of household trash and threw them in, knowing the city would remove it for free. Literal carpet of cigarette butts in every green space in the city. I can't honestly express how many cigarette butts there were. I'm a heavy smoker, and I was disgusted. The cherry on top was when I held the door for a woman, and her grown husband tried to physically assault me before the restaurant workers stepped in to throw him out. Turns out, me holding the door for his lady emasculated him. I don't give a shit about cultural differences. A grown-ass man assaulting a 15-year-old child is unacceptable. I will never ever return to Rome. Everything about the city turned me off forever. Imo, don't waste your time there. The rest of Italy is so beautiful, and the people, so kind and friendly. I have backpacked, hitchhiked, and rode cargo trains all across Mexico and Central America. I have seen the best and the worst. I absolutely hate the Nicaraguan border. The people there will lie, steal and literally grab you to try to get you into their taxi cabs or shops. There's a bus to Managua that costs only like $1. That's from Pens Blancas. The taxis were trying to charge tourists $50 just to get to Rivas, which was literally like 20 or 30 miles down the road. Not only that, but the border agents there, the ones that stamp your passport book, are absolute trash as well. They hate tourists. They especially hate tourists who have been to Nicaragua more than once. I have seen people on multiple occasions get the 3rd degree. What are you doing here? How much money do you have? What hostel or hotel will you be staying at? Do you have a job here? Are you only going to that city? How do you expect to get around? How old are you? What is your full name? Etc. It's stupid because never at any of the other borders have I seen or had this happen. Also it cost $13 to enter Nicaragua. Are you faking serious, dude? But my favorite place is also in Nicaragua. San Juan del Sur. It's like there isn't anyone over 40 there at all. The place is just full of people in their early 20s to late 30s. Sunday fun day. The bars are legit. It's so easy to get laid. Food is great. Waves are good at Romanzo and play a Yankee. It's the best place I have been so far in my travels. Naples, Italy, the most congested city in Europe, and it looks it. Been all over Europe, lived in cities, so I'm pretty street smart, not overly brave, just paranoid. Everywhere we went in Naples, which was only part of a day, I felt like someone was stalking us. I was carrying a heavy camera bag and we are obviously tourists, so it was impossible not to stick out in the crowd. Traffic rules are optional for drivers, so pay close attention if you're a pedestrian. No street signs anywhere I could find, and I wasn't keen to stand around trying to figure out a map. I have never been so glad to get out of a city before dark. There was this sense of impending doom once the sun went down. Despite it all, we had some of the best pizza I've ever eaten a few blocks from the train station. Fun story, we took the subway to the Herculaneum Museum and I opted to wait and let the crowd file out first to shake anyone who might be following us. I guess that was a dumb idea, because these young guys were also dawdling. And when I saw how this was sorting out, I quickly made our way to the escalator. I don't think they were planning on mugging us, I think they were doing a drug deal in the station at the base of the escalator. There was no opposing platform, so we were truly alone. TLDR, Naples, no, and no. Peruvian here. Go to visit family every few months. The country has some beautiful places, but in Lima, the crime is so high. The cities, towns, a lot of them beautiful but many of them unsafe. Used to live there, know how to take care of myself. Windows up in the car all the time. I never took out my phone in public. But at least I blend in, sorta. Bright colored hair sometimes made it more obvious I was a foreigner, but I brought a friend from the US once with me, and everywhere we went, at least in my town, people were eyeing us up and down. There was once two guys who decided we were nice prey and started walking, one in front of us, one behind. Again, eyeing our pockets. Thankfully, a family member who's lived there her entire life was with us, got us out of the way, and warned us of it. We met a guy from southern US in one of the stores we were at. He realized we were from there and told us a story of the multiple times he's had his pockets cut and how he'd been almost stabbed in the 10 years he was living there. Not too long before we met, a guy had put a knife to his throat to steal his cell phone, which was a very cheap flip phone, 2 blocks away from his house, and left a cut, thankfully not deep but still. And the stories from all the people that I know that live there, they get robbed numerous times throughout the years, even in front of their houses. Mallorca, Spain. We were visiting family in Ireland a couple decades ago and decided to take a side trip. Last minute, we wavered between Spain and Greece. I really wanted Greece, but my husband's family all insisted we should do Spain instead, so that's what we did. Although the hotel staff was okay, the restaurants and shops workers were incredibly rude and definitely not the least inclined to be even a tad helpful. Food was ridiculously expensive even in the grocery store. Everything catered to the British as far as food and drink. I had wanted to experience a different culture. I drank some sangria one night and got extremely ill, and it didn't go away. I was tested for hepatitis when I got home, and again 6 months later, as I was still not quite right. I was negative, but there was definitely something that got me. My liver is often inflamed ever since. Besides that, it was the end of the season, and it was cool and very rainy, though I can't fault Spain for that. We met some people at the Manchester airport on our way back home who had done the same thing we did, but went to Greece instead. They had lovely tans, because they had fantastic weather, and said the people were so friendly and hospitable and the food amazing. I have been quite a few places, and have never experienced rudeness to the level we did there. I have been better treated by enemies. I still can't believe that people would continue to recommend a place that treated people so badly. I regret to this day not going to Greece. I did have some good times there in spite of the lack of hospitality and getting sick. We are happy travelers, not the kind of people who sit and demand that people cater to and entertain us. We get out to sea and do stuff and participate in games, etc. We actually won best couple at the hotel entertainment thing, yay us. I look forward to going back sometime and seeing more of Ireland and Europe, but Spain will not be included next time. Maybe not France either, if they are as rude as their reputation suggests. Life is too short to put up with that shit. Lisbon, Portugal 2013. The tiled streets, the random slopes and alleys of Alfama. It does have charm, but what killed it for me was the greed and filth. It is a dirty place. I'm from Cape Town and our city is a lot cleaner. Also, if you go to a restaurant, they will bring you a basket of bread or some cold meat, but that isn't free. If you eat one piece of the bread, it will be added to your bill, just the piece you ate, not the whole loaf, and then probably served onto the next table. I was served a half-eaten loaf of bread and sent it back with much objection from my waitress. Also, walk through any park, train station or street in general, and you will be offered drugs, but it's oregano and totally legal for them to sell. The police don't care at all. It's buyer beware, and a lot of people looking to make money. The worst thing I saw was a guy with a small puppy cutting the dog with a razor to use in a begging scheme right in front of a police officer. I approached the officer and told him what I saw. He definitely saw it too, and he just turned a blind eye. They have no regard for animals or heritage, and have no class. It officially made me hate Portugal to the point that I cancelled my trip up the coast and flew to Spain instead, and was more than happy to get back to Africa. I can't think of any place that I've been where I'd never want to go again. The only thing I can think of is never doing what I did while on business trip in Dalian, China, Intel F68. I was staying at In Fine Hotel and decided to take the light rail near the hotel to downtown Dalian for the beer festival. I was having a blast at the festival and stayed until they were closing, 10 p.m. I started my trek back to the light rail and noticed no trains were running. I mistakenly didn't check the light rail schedules as I had assumed they would at least run until midnight as they do in the US, so I flagged down a taxi that happened to be driving by the light rail station and handed the guy a business card from the hotel. He shook his head, no, handed back the card to me, and drove off. I ended up walking about a half mile on the busy main roads towards the airport and eventually flagged down another taxi. This time I asked to be taken to the airport, which he gladly obliged. When I arrived at the airport, I paid the driver and then took a taxi from the airport to the hotel. The next day I found out from one of the locals is taxi drivers will only stay within Dalian due to too many people not paying, get to their destination and running off. During my walk, as I passed some of the locals, I kept wondering if they were thinking what the heck is a white boy doing walking downtown late at night. Late to the party, but let's give it a try. In order of places I hated. Worst to least worst. Riyadh. Like a less interesting form of Dubai. More strict. Hated/loved foreigners in a weird we pay you to do our stuff so get it done, and we have some incompetent local managing you. Lagos, Nigeria was a disaster. Nothing works. Traffic meaning you travel for 6 hours a day to get anywhere. Power outages hourly/daily. People are never on time for appointments. Hot and humid. Expensive like you would never believe, $500 a night for a hotel which should be $30. Lagos has an amazing beach. If it was not for the pollution, litter, sewage, and gangsters, you could make it rival any beach in the world. Was almost late for my departing flight because 6 hours is not enough time to get through security and check-in. Egypt. Hotel was amazing, but outside malls and offices not much going on. I had the impression that the pyramids were hated by the government and locals. Litter damage and lack of care for something so old and amazing broke my heart. Phuket, Bali, overrun with Australian and Russian tourists who drink too much and push prices way up. Not outrageous but definitely not right for their low quality. Places I can't decide. Jakarta. It's had literally the best hotel I have ever stayed in, but in the middle of a slum. Surrounded by top class marble shopping centers and restaurants. Traffic as bad as you have ever seen almost 24 hours a day. But the lower class and upper class all mixed together in a big crazy mix. Interesting but wow, not for me. Wisconsin Dells/Lake Delton. The scenery is absolutely beautiful. Rock formations carved by floodwaters from an ancient glacial lake tower over the Wisconsin River, providing amazing sights from the boat tours. However, the thing that makes Wisconsin Dells a place I do not want to go to is the very thing that keeps the city alive: tourism. I believe tourism has ruined the area because the huge amounts of tourists has caused uncountable resorts to be built in the area, and these resorts are huge. Most of the resorts are mostly water parks. Wisconsin Dells uses the slogan water park capital of the world. Some of the major resorts have extravagant features such as numerous roller coasters and even an indoor Ferris wheel. I'm not completely sure about this, but someone told me that there is a small zoo in one of the resorts. I believe it is Kalahari. The main street of the Dells has also been ruined by tourism. Every store exists to cater to the huge amounts of tourists that visit in the summer. There are a lot of tourists from Chicago that go there because it is the closest place with quality water parks. There are also countless billboards scattered throughout the area advertising for tourist venues. Wisconsin Dells and Lake Delton have no culture due to the huge amounts of tourists and the huge themed resorts. In my opinion, tourism has ruined the area. TLDR, tourism has ruined Wisconsin Dells. PS. I don't hate tourism. Tourism is good for any community. However, too much of a good thing can be bad. Does it count traveling to another state of the same country? If so, Rio de Janeiro. I know it's a beautiful on the movies, but in real life there is trash on the streets. People will try to take any advantage they can over you. It's hot the 24th of July 365. Not to mention that it's dangerous as hell. On downtown, you are very likely to be robbed in daylight, even in the bus. I don't know about you guys, but I don't get comfortable with the possibility of getting shot at any moment by drug addicted people. When I took a bus on Rio, all passengers would stay on the first half of the bus and I didn't know why until I saw a lot of homeless people entering from the back door and using the last seats. Here in Brazil, most buses have two doors, the front one to get in and the back one to leave the bus. When I went to the beach, a guy popped out of nowhere and insisted for like 20 minutes that I should buy his not even a bit suspicious snacks. Who doesn't want to buy Doritos on a translucent plastic bag? People in Rio have to touch you when talking to you. Particularly, I hate this. I'm from the south. There's a lot of German culture in my state, so we don't keep touching each other when talking to them. I've even heard that some small cities teach kids German first and Portuguese second, and their accent irritates me. Of places I would absolutely never ever return to, I'd only say Dubai. An absolutely soulless place built entirely on literal slave labor. Aside from that, there are some places I don't have much desire to return to. Kenya is first. I think in general it's similar enough to Tanzania, but without some of the really amazing places Tanzania has, such as Kilimanjaro, Zanzibar, Highlands, etc. Also tends to be a bit more expensive and touristy than Tanzania, and less safe in general. I wouldn't say don't go there, but if I was going back to East Africa I'd go for Tanzania over Kenya. Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea. I only went there to visit a family member who is working there, but it's really an empty city that has nothing to do. Papuan tourism industry is essentially non-existent, and while there are some beautiful beaches and resorts, although extremely expensive and hard to get to, in the rest of the country, there is close to nothing to do in Moresby apart from go to the nature park, which is decent, I'll admit, and the yacht club. There's not much in the way of special culture or cuisine in the city, despite PNG being one of the most diverse and naturally beautiful countries on earth. Gets boring after a day or two. Maybe in a few decades it will be different though as the country develops. Hong Kong I probably wouldn't go back to. There are just better Asian cities. It seemed very similar to Singapore, but dirtier and not quite as safe. I had a decent time there with my friends, but seemed like it would be very boring to go for more than the couple of days I was there. The Eiffel Tower. The whole waiting experience was 2 hours before we eventually decided to leave the queue and go find a restaurant before we lose our flights. That was one of the most unorganized places I have ever been, with 3 queues reaching 2,000 to 2,500 people under any weather conditions, in our cases 2 hours under the sun. The information provided by the authorities that run the place was non-existent to useless. Nobody in the queues had an actual estimation on how much one has to wait to get the elevator to the top. Plus while queuing they constantly close the doors to the normal queue to bring in more of the priority/pre-book people. Ending up for the last 40 minutes to have 2,000 plus just watching elevators going up empty to bring people down. I trust we needed another good 2 to 3 hours, a total of 5 hours, to get up and down from the top. And for this kind of service they will charge 17 euros, and I do not know how much more if someone pre-book. Even the priority queues were having the exact same problems. Therefore, to not provide ETA to tourists shows the complete disrespect towards them. They just look the tourists as sheeps there. Not recommended. Never again unless they change their fuck up system. Do something else in Paris instead. It is a big city. Kenya. I spent a couple of weeks in a poor little village on the coast of Lake Victoria some years back, volunteering at a school which was funded by a project at my old high school. Never again. Now, I'm not one to take prejudiced stances in most cases, but after getting to know the culture and society there I'm sure as hell never going back. First of all, I found a culture with no long-term thinking whatsoever. If a family received a goat from a Western charity organization they would put it on a short leash, essentially starving it, before finally butchering it for a thin soup and asking for a new one. This I thought was such an arrogant and wasteful strategy. Rather than to actually take care of the goat, perhaps use the neighbor's goat to make babies. No, not in that way. Milk it and potentially grow a larger stock of animals to feed the entire village. They would simply throw away their charities and expect new ones. In addition to this, I found a very racist and prejudiced society. The children would constantly chase after us yelling Mzungu, Mzungu. I was told it essentially meant wandering ghost and would stand outside our windows at night looking in like we were some kind of attraction at zoo. Now this I can partly understand. We were the only white people they'd probably ever seen, but coming from such a politically correct culture myself, I'm Swedish, we found it quite odd to be on the wrong side of racism. Lastly, I found a society where human and animal lives had very little value. Folks would use their families, pets, and clothes ones as stepping stones to gain an advantage over them. This even meaning leaving their children to be sexually abused and infected with HIV. Now I can understand that there are different cultures and values in the world, and that I might just be a spoiled little first world brat complaining about a poor little village in Africa, but my main issue is simply that society are making so many mistakes that my own has made several hundred years ago, and being so naive that all I would want is to help, as so little organization could improve so many people's lives so much if they would only want the help and care to listen. TLDR, I found volunteering to fund a school much more giving than actually visiting the place for it. Tennessee, or more specifically, Sparta. I got stopped by the police a few years ago while on a road trip from Boston to the Bonnaroo Music Festival. The cop pulled me over because I had a license plate frame. You know, the sheety black plastic ones that car dealerships all over the place install on every car they sell. Apparently those are illegal in TN and are enough of a reason for a traffic stop. Going to Bonnaroo, of course we had a ton of weed in the car. Cop also happened to have a drug canine in the car. I ended up being charged with misdemeanor possession. Almost got time in jail and almost had probation where I would have had to find a way back to Bumpfuck, Tennessee every month for a year to get drug tested. But luckily things didn't work out that way and I only got fined $1K and got 1 year of unsupervised probation. I was only 20 at the time, so honestly I had no idea how any of the legal stuff worked. I was freaking the fuck out and I just didn't want my parents to find out. I was a college engineering student with a good future, and that was threatened because of Tennessee's insane drug laws. My life was nearly ruined because of some goddamn joints that I brought to smoke at a music festival. The cop who pulled us over was convinced that people at Bonnaroo were dying left and right because of the marijuanas. He acted like he was a hero for saving countless people's lives by keeping a few joints out of the festival. And apparently they pulled over a bunch of other people for similar bullshit reasons. Met others in court who were subjected to the same shit. One guy was pulled over because the cop said it was illegal to drive with headlights on during the day. Another one was pulled over because the cop thought they didn't have their seatbelt on. I never intend to go back to Tennessee or anywhere in that armpit of the US. I still got to enjoy Bonnaroo, and it was still one of the best weekends in my life, despite the trouble with the police. However, I'm not going to put a single extra cent back to the economy of that faked up redneck shithole. The pyramids in Cairo, egg pit. Considering it's one of the 7 wonders of the world, it's just not as glamorous as it should be. There are massive holes where you can fall into unless you're careful. The ground is uneven. There is rubbish all over the place. The toilets, an open building with a hole in the ground. You squat to do your business. There are people trying to see you postcards and will follow you round until you need to become rude to them for them to literally fuck off from your face. Getting in, prepare to be searched and have some ID held while you're there. If the mustached guy at the gate is having a bad day and doesn't like your look, then it may take a while to get in. Want a tour guide where you can go on the camels? You got some cocky tea. What's that will haggle you for what is quite a high cost because they know if it's not you, someone else will pay what they want. They will be charming as hell until you give in. If you take them on, it will seem like a good deal until they sulk if you don't buy them a cold drink or not go to their mate's perfume shop at the bottom near the pyramids complex. They will then also want a tip at the end. They will haggle for a higher tip. They will watch you get your money out and visually and mentally take a cut of your wallet. At the end of the day you'll be so tired, it will seem like wasn't worth it. And for one of the 7 wonders of the world it isn't. There are much nicer places to visit tbh, for free and that are much more peaceful. Barrett was there as a transit passenger. They told us when we arrived that there was no such thing as a transit passenger and lined us up against a wall with bullet holes opposite a bunch of soldiers with guns. They then told us that there was a transit area, but they weren't going to let us through. The soldiers were incredibly power hungry and just laughed whenever we told them that we needed to get to our other flight. They then took our passports. After hours, we asked them how we were supposed to get to our next flight in an attempt to start solving this situation. The soldier said, "What I want you to do is sleep for 1 hour and stand up for 1 hour and then sleep for 1 hour and then stand up for 1 hour." He kept saying this and started laughing. We were taken to a room full of soldiers who had our passports. They interrogated and laughed at us. After sitting back by the wall with the bullet holes, a lady who looked like an airport official walked by. I asked her how we can get to the transit area and explained our situation. She seemed confused and then got angry. She went and grabbed our passports, scolded the soldiers, took us to the transit area, and apologized. We got our flights eventually. Thank God. Also, Mozambique was quite scary. I nearly died of septicemia and was attacked by a gang of men with machetes, but I actually do want to go back there again. Venice, but for my own reasons. I went as a personal adventure holiday by myself, thinking it would be fun. A bit of poor planning on my part left me going on one of the hottest weeks of the year by myself for 4 days. I'm not exactly a bar or shopping guy, so it was purely the sights and attractions of Venice itself. I also booked a cheap hotel, so all there was to do there was eat breakfast and sit in my room watching the TV. I spent day 1 having a good time. I went early. I saw some great stuff. Went to the museums. Went to the churches. Saw some art and some high views. It was fun. Day 2 I was pretty much out of stuff to do. I had planned everything I wanted to see, and waking up early I managed to get all of it done on the first day. I spent it wandering the entire city. While amazing in its own right, everything starts to blur after hour 5 when you have no one to talk to and the burning hot sun is on you. Day 3 I was exhausted. I got one of the tourist/public transport boats and spent several hours just circumnavigating the city and just basically chilled as I got driven around and let my feet heal. Day 4, still nothing to do. I spent the day sketching and cataloging graffiti. Fun fact, Venice is covered in graffiti. Near the end I tried to find the casino that I was seeing on a bunch of maps, but never found a suitable stop-off boat. Now I'm not saying don't go to Venice. It's a fantastic place and amazing to see. I'm just saying don't go by yourself on one of the hottest weeks of the year. There is a car ferry in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania that takes you to Kigamboni where we would stay for a few days. First night we arrive and our driver takes us to the ferry. We drive on at 11 PM and it was quite nice seeing Dar's lights shimmer in the background against the darkness of the Indian Ocean. I think we might just have caught the last crossing that night. The next day, we return to the ferry to cross over to Dar again. Now, basking in the heat of the midday, the first thing that struck me as we approached the town that had been ramshackled beside the berth of the ferry was the smell. It was like a mix of rotting fish/flesh, excrement, and body odor. The tang, as me and my friend started to refer to it as, became tasteable. The midday crossings were the stuff of nightmares. If you remember that scene in the recent War of the Worlds, where they in the only working car and they are trying to get on a ferry, imagine that, but just that it's happening in a third world country. We didn't have the only working car, but we definitely had the only white people. So everyone who sees us wants to sell us something: beads, necklaces, clothes, cigarettes, jewelry, knives, by banging on our windows. As I learned from previous experience, never show any feint of interest, never let them put anything in your hands, and especially never roll down the window when they claim they want to talk to you. As the ferry pulls up and unloads what seems like hundreds of folks, we start to move with the crowd surrounding us. Comments are made, guys shout to their friends that the white people are here, women stare into the windows and call their girlfriends over to gaze upon the oddities in the car. Kids say unintentionally racist things. We eventually get guided onto the ferry and the one of the crew approaches us when we park, telling us not to leave the car, suggesting it would cause too much commotion. The previous night we were able to go up to the upper deck and wander, but now, surrounded by commuters, salesmen, women with their children, tightly packed onto a ferry that took 15-20 minutes to cross, we are told that the commotion might cause an imbalance. As we pull off from the town, the tank dissipates to be replaced by strong body odor and gas. I want to smoke, but I'm worried by the smell and being hassled for cigarettes by the hundreds of folk I'm sharing this voyage with. When we were in Dar, I asked if that was the only route to get back to Kingamboni. Turned out there was a road that went around the harbor, out of the city and back to where we were staying, 1 hour or so. Edit. I remember feeling sick for about a month anytime we discussed, or I remembered, that Ferris port or the town. I travel a lot for work and have a short list. First on that list is Rio. The whole place is filthy. There are a very few good restaurants, but they are way more expensive than the same quality in other countries. The beaches are disgusting with wet steamy turds all over. The beaches in Rio have a reputation for talent, and that's there. But the talent is vastly outnumbered by fat naked grandma. Honestly, I can't ever unsee what I saw there. Brazil does have a culture of stout strong coffee, which is such a relief after a trip too. Second on the list is Southeast Asia. Go to Singapore, and after 2 weekends you've seen everything. Everything. If you're into such tourism, I'm not, then Singapore is great. If not, then the food is good but overpriced, the weather is miserable and heinous. If you're there in one of the months, where Indonesia has decided to douse itself in gasoline and set a match. If you're into shopping name brand, Singapore is great. In short, if you're not into hose and overpriced handbags, Singapore gets real old real fast. The other nations in Southeast Asia have good food, but are chock full of all the mind-boggling methods of bafflement and bullshit that suddenly make it so clear why expats make so much money. It's a never-ending parade of things like this. You go to a resort area and rent a cabin with 2 beds. And you get 2 beds, but only 1 blanket, towel and pillow. And no, you can't have another until tomorrow because Ramadan. None of these little annoyances are big, but in total they paint a clear picture that third world poverty is an effect not a cause. Everyone is really nice and polite, but that is not enough to make you look forward to the trip. Oh, and +1 to the Greyhound bus station in Atlanta. Bracknell in Berkshire in England. Had to go down on business. This was one of the shittiest faking holes in the ground that I've ever had the misfortune to lose shoe leather in. The best restaurant was a Chinese buffet that had chicken that was so dry it was powdery, or a Domino's pizza takeaway place. Nicest hotel was a travel lodge. There were a couple of pubs. They were prefab pieces of sheet where various different brands of bland sheety lager were poured by a sullen middle-aged woman pushing a button. Want a whiskey? Have unsolicited ice and soda. That shut at 10 p.m. There was a chav-infested cinema that stank of acrid piss. The most interesting building, now demolished, was this faking eyesore which had every window under throwing height smashed. Anyway, I sorted sheet out for my client and all went well, but then my managers in work asked me to go again. This time for a month. You're off down to Bracknell, I'm faking not, I'm afraid you have to beep boop. It's non-negotiable. There was a couple of seconds where I wondered if I had the balls to say no, and with a wavering tiny voice said, I'm really sorry guys, that's not happening. You'll have my notice on your desk in 20 minimums. There were a few things that made me quit that job, but Bracknell again was the deciding factor. I quite like England generally, but if I had to live in Bracknell, I'd stuff 2 knitting needles up my nose and smash my face against the desk. The Philippines. Stayed in my grandparents' house in Nassau for 2 weeks during winter break 1 year. Was literally counting down the days until school started again. Point, it was too hot and humid. I didn't speak the language. There were 14 people, 4 from my direct family, 2 grandparents, 4 from one uncle's family, 4 from other uncle's family, and 1 bathroom/shower combination with no locks and no shower curtains. There were roaches all over the place, ants on the tables, bed bugs and ants in my bed, etc. The fridge didn't work. They just used it to hold food. I couldn't drink the water there. I could only drink bottled water. Also, my family avoided my dad, sister and I because we didn't speak Tagalog. My mom literally went out with all 10 of them and left the 3 of us home with the maids. My cousin, who I had Skyped with in English multiple times, started talking to me in Tagalog, but straight up walked away when I said I didn't speak it. Didn't talk to me again the entire time. There were brownouts too, and we couldn't go outside because beggars knew we were American and would harass us for money. We visited some important church and someone put a nail in our tire. We visited my mom's high school friends and people would just take our picture in the street. The beaches were full of garbage and more beggars that were trying to sell us crap and get money. We did find some crabs at the beaches though, so that was cool. We stayed in a 2-star hotel for the last 2 days, and it felt like the greatest hotel I'd ever seen. Legitimately the worst vacation I'd ever been on, quite possibly the worst 2 weeks of my life. Thank God I live in a first world country tbh. Also wow, that sounded really complain why. Baltimore. Yeah I know it's got history and weird character and all that shit, but I lived there for 4 years and let me tell you firsthand, it's kind of a shithole. Even in Mount Vernon, you couldn't go outside without seeing the same 5 or 6 beggars every single day. I stopped giving them money a long time ago, and I know they knew who I was, because I'd see them every day. It's just depressing seeing people in such a bad way literally every time you go outside. Add to it the poverty and the crime, although, I gotta hand it to the BPD, robberies at least of students in Mount Vernon haven't happened in a good while, so that's nice, and it's just not a place that I'd ever want to live again. Also, the drivers, holy shit, the drivers are insane. It's like as a requirement, to be a driver there, you have to get your blinker stalk removed. Literally no one uses their signals. Every time I had to ride in a car driven by a MD driver, I almost got car sick because of how jerky they drive and how fast they take corners. It's like they're all teenage drivers. Even the highways are super small and make super sharp turns, so they are terrifying in the rain. People just aren't polite there. When you pass someone on the street, they don't look at you. Ever. I'm from the south, so this was a very strange thing to adjust to. Routinely, I'd be waiting in line in a restaurant, usually Chipotle where this would happen, and the person would just go, I want a bowl. I want this. I want that. No please. No thank you. Nothing. It's just always stressed me out. I always thought some bad shit was gonna happen to me. Thankfully it never did. Singapore. The place felt like a big mall and was boring. The only thing there was to do was shop. The beach was clean, which was cool, but it just seemed empty and devoid of life. I can see why people might like it, but it felt devoid of culture to me. The streets were empty in the middle of the day and at night. Walking on the streets was like being in an empty amusement park immediately after it rained and everybody had gone home. It's like they were designed to accommodate a bunch of people who never came. The food is supposed to be the draw of that place, and we did have some really delicious chili crab thing. We were so bored that this dampened our enjoyment of meals, though. Everything was a bit expensive, which I don't mind if I'm having a good time, but there wasn't even people watching to be had. The only time we saw groups of people, they were clearly there for a business conference or something. Lame. The taxi driver who drove us to our hotel lectured us about not littering or drinking too much and getting wild. Thanks, guy. We aren't rude travelers. I'm not sure why he assumed that we might be. I was just there with my husband and we looked like two nondescript westerners. This last part wasn't a big deal, but I'm struggling to think of one memory worth mentioning. LAX. My flight got delayed, so I missed my connection to Hawaii. We were going to get married in 2 days, still had to pick up that license, etc. We arrived at the check-in after running to the domestic airport, rushing and skipping lines for registration, just to arrive as the doors were closed. All my pleas were going nowhere. It was the last flight that day and they wouldn't take us with them. All my arguing got us onto the first flight for the next day. Now the shit show begins. We had to stay the remaining day and overnight within the airport. My then soon-to-be wife found some sleep on my lap while I couldn't close an eye with all kinds of people around. Shady drug addicts, homeless people, whatever lurking around. I witnessed one guy pissing on the benches. Another one got arrested by 5 officers. There was some construction work within the ceiling, so there were these car cranes driving around from panel to panel and beeping loud the whole night. In the next morning we wanted to check into our flight and were told that we were on the waiting list and could only board if people were missing. Of course that guy who worked the other shift didn't dare to tell upset me about that. Now upset, sleep deprived me had to sit in the gate, hoping for people to not check into their flights. Did I mention that there were 3 flights with the same procedure I had to take from Lax to Moi? So not sitting on burning coals once, but 3 times with the risk of stranding on the wrong island/airport and missing our booked wedding. Fun times. 2001, spring break. I was 17 and on my way to Dallas from Roswell NM via Greyhound. Going to a big concert, summer sanatorium tour with Metallica, Kid Rock, System of a Down, Con, and Powerman 5000. Anyway, I was riding solo and having friends/fam pick me up in Dallas when I arrived 4-hour layover in Lubbock. I want to say it could have been Amarillo, I don't recall exactly, but it was one of those two, and I'm sitting by myself trying to kill time and keep occupied. I was doodling with an ink pen on my hand, hour of boredom. So there I am, minding my own business, keeping to myself. Mind you, I'm young, I look even younger, and I'm solo, and I noticed some quick shuffling going on right next to me. Apparently a man had sat down next to me, and I had not noticed initially until this shuffling. I glance over casually to see him looking right at me. I mean locked in. His face with a grin and his eyes fixated on my lap. The shuffling, I found out a second later, was him stroking his harden through his pants. I felt a wave of cold spiky energy wave over me, and I instantly jumped up and wiggled into the crowd. I've never felt more alone or scared in my life. Surrounded by people, crowds of bustling travelers, I feel my skin crawling and can hear my heart beat. Everything is in slow motion as I scramble into some restaurant that was attached to the station. There was another later 20s guy that noticed the drawing in my hand and commented on how well it was drawn. I could tell instantly that he was gay, but felt no resistance to his approach. Actually kinda the opposite. I felt relief that I may have just found a travel buddy. I explained to him what had just happened, and he put his arm around me and said don't worry, that no one was gonna get near me, and him stuck together for the remainder of the trip. I kept my distance from the creepy faker by staying at the back of the room, but keeping him in my view at all times. Looking back, I never thought to tell security or police, but I should have. I see this sick fuck get on a bus labeled New York City and I instantly blacklisted that city to ever visit because of him. Long story short, I got to Dallas and saw the concert, and it was boss. But I'll never take the bus again, and both Lubbock and New York City has been blacklisted for me because some sick pedophile. The experience really scarred me, and I'll never forget it. Iceland. We've flown Iceland Air several times, where they bombard you with ads for staying a night or two in their country. So we decided to spend a day and night there. It ended up being totally shitty and not worth it at all. The airport and the town aren't near each other. Even having booked a bus reservation ahead of time to get from the airport to the city, we stood out in the cold in July and dark, more like twilight, for an hour waiting to get on a bus to ride an hour or more into town. Note I'm saying town. Reykjavik is a small town with a few shops and not much else except a big church. You're better off strolling around, well, almost any moderately large town or small city. We wandered around Portland, Maine last week, and it was about 100 times as fun as Reykjavik. To actually go do stuff, you need to book a tour and plan for a whole day. The hot springs they push so hard are actually just the cooling outflow from a power plant. You can see pretty landscapes in many other nicer and less expensive places in the world. If you go there, rent a car and drive yourself. Buy food at the grocery store, because restaurants are crazy expensive. Get any booze at the duty free at the airport, because they tax the ever-loving shit out of it. So if hanging out in power plant, outwash, getting prepared foods from the grocery store, and rationing pre-purchased beer, all so you can drive yourself several hours to see another pretty view that you could see in any number of places in the world, is appealing to you, then Iceland just might be the place for you.